Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. I Became a God in American Comics. Chapter 61. But Thor drove the car out of respect for Loki, because last time he sparred with Arno. Arno hit him on the head with his hammer while carrying him to the sky. Only then did he realize that being carried and flying without control was not a pleasant and even painful thing. Not long after, Thor brought Loki to a building with only 2 floors, but much larger than other buildings in the manor. Pushing the door in, the spacious hall was bustling. Various snacks floating in the red mist, silver figures quickly shuttled through the red mist to sweep away the snacks, and many maids who were clapping and clapping to make fire. And the Hulk who was drinking with the shirtless Wade. Hulk. Is it really lively here? Loki looked at the scene of everyone showing off their magical powers with a twitch at the corner of his mouth, and he had doubts that this was really a mortal world. Thor looked proud, as if this was his territory. Right, the atmosphere here is nice, it's like home here, do you want to stay here too? Without waiting for Loki to answer, a big green hand grabbed his cape and pulled him back. Hulk said with a blushing face. Thor, come drink with Hulk. Wade, weak. You, strong. Thor smelled the alcohol on Hulk, which was stronger than his own, and his face changed. Hulk, how much have you drunk? This is the wine I brought from Asgard. Hulk, listen to Thor, keep drinking. You keep drinking with me. Hulk said and dragged Thor to the wine table. Loki, I'll come to you later, you go and talk to Arno first. Loki nodded to Thor. I don't know why, although he has never seen Hulk, he feels inexplicably afraid of Hulk. Loki shook his head to dispel the idea. He was just a mortal who looked bigger. How could he be afraid? He turned his head and looked around. He soon found his target this time, Arno Stark, the strongest man in Midgard. He came to Earth this time to complete the deal with Thanos. He brought the cosmic cube back to Thanos and attacked Earth. Thanos spared his planet and his believers. He got the cosmic cube easily. Because Thanos sent him a capable helper, supergiant. Thanos used the spatial ability of the cosmic cube to teleport him to the location of the cosmic cube in reverse. And the base guarded by only mortals was equivalent to no one guarding it for him and Supergiant. Supergiant controlled everyone with his mind in just a moment. If he hadn't proposed to kill everyone here, the Earth would be more vigilant. Supergiant also planned to control these people to kill each other. Just like what Supergiant did to his believers on his planet. It was easy to get the cosmic cube, but it was not so easy to attack the Earth. Although this was just a mortal planet, it did not mean that there was no resistance. Not to mention that the human army was not something that he and Supergiant could conquer alone. What's more, there was a powerful supernatural being like Arno. As for how Supergiant knew Arno's information, this was not a difficult task for someone with mind control. Supergiant controlled Hawkeye and knew a lot of secret information about the Earth that was unknown to the public. Among them was Arno, the god of the world. Although Supergiant did not think that this Earthling could be compared with his father, he still did not choose to attack Arno rashly, but was ready to send out a large army to attack the Earth directly. Therefore, she and Loki took 2 steps. She took Dr. Eric, who was studying the cosmic cube, and Hawkeye to collect and make materials that could open the portal. Loki was arranged by Supergiant to take the Mind Scepter, which was said to be able to control all living things, to disrupt the most powerful combat force on Earth, so as to buy time for her to open the space gate. Loki thought about the purpose of this time, his mouth slightly raised, and he walked towards Arno with the Mind Scepter. He was listening to Tony say that his new battle armor was going to be remotely detached and automatically armed. Arno suddenly looked at Loki who was walking over, and Tony also saw the stranger in the party and stopped explaining his next battle suit. Respected Midgard strongman, first of all, I sincerely apologize to you for my reckless and stupid behavior last time. Loki bowed his head and apologized as soon as he came up, with a very humble attitude. Oh, this time our second prince came down to apologize to me specifically. Arno was unmoved by his apology, and glanced at the scepter inlaid with a blue gem in Loki's hand. Mind Scepter, or Mind Gem, although I don't know what this thing is, whether it will work on him. But he was not prepared to try. As long as Loki had the intention to attack him, then he would crush his neck without hesitation in an instant. Loki suddenly felt a sense of horror, but he could not detect anything wrong. He suppressed the inexplicable fear in his heart and smiled slightly. Of course not, I came here mainly to make a deal with the respected Midgard strongman. Arno raised his eyelids and showed a hint of interest. Oh. Loki slowly raised the mental authority in his hand and stretched it out to Arno. Then, Arno took the scepter handed over by Loki. Arno looked at the scepter curiously, or the mental gem on it, and said lightly. Oh, instead of using it to control me, you are going to give it to me. Listening to Arno's words, Loki broke out in a cold sweat. Now he finally knew what the creepy feeling was just now. He actually knew that this scepter could control people's minds. If I hadn't handed him the scepter just now, but intended to use it to control him, what would the consequences be? Loki swallowed his dry throat, and the smile on his face became a little far-fetched. Arno handed him a glass of wine, smiled and said, "Don't worry, you made a wise choice, I won't shoot your head. Tell me, what's your deal?" Loki took the wine and took a sip, and regained his elegant and calm demeanor. But there was a deep hatred in his eyes, but not for Arno. "I will tell you the identity and purpose of the aliens invading the Earth this time, you need to promise to do me a favor." Arno looked at Loki thoughtfully. In the original book, although Loki was also assigned by Thanos to attack the Earth. But there were no other invaders in the original book, and there was only one Loki before the space wormhole opened. "Tell me about it." Loki did not hesitate and said directly. "First of all, in addition to me, there is also a mind controller, supergiant, who invaded the Earth this time. Her mind control is very strong. You must be careful. If you, as the strongest, are controlled by her mind, then everything is over. And the mastermind behind the scenes is a being called Thanos, a notorious planet butcher in the universe. Wherever he goes, half of the creatures on the planet will be slaughtered, which naturally includes the Earth he is about to attack. But their goal this time is not only to attack the Earth, but also to get the Cosmic Cube. The Cosmic Cube is a space treasure that Asgard left on the Earth. The endless energy it contains can open a space portal across infinite space distances. Quote, "Now the Cosmic Cube has been taken by Supergiant, but I have never understood why he must do this. Thanos clearly knows that my father is still alive, and my father will not watch the 9 kingdoms under his command being slaughtered. So he must attack the Earth after getting the Cosmic Cube, which is definitely not as simple as slaughtering half of the Earth's population. As for the exact reason, I don't know." Quote, "As for me, Thanos gave Supergiant the order to convey to me to disrupt the strongest force on Earth. That is, use the Mind Scepter to control your civil war and buy time for Supergiant to manufacture the space teleportation device." Quote, Arno listened quietly to Loki's story, and his eyes looked at the Stark building through a long distance. Looking at Dr. Eric, who was already building the space teleportation device, Arno smiled. "Interesting, it seems that the plot has completely changed, and the space teleportation device has been manufactured so much earlier. Although he can go over now to destroy the space teleportation device and get the Cosmic Cube, putting an end to this invasion." But he was not in a hurry. He took a sip of wine slowly and looked at Loki calmly. "So, I have given you the information. What do you want from me?" "Revenge. I want you to help me kill Superstar, kill Thanos and his army." The suppressed hatred in Loki's eyes finally broke out completely. He would not believe Thanos' nonsense that he would let his planet go if he helped him attack the Earth and take back the Cosmic Cube. Do you think he is mentally retarded for such nonsense? Planet butcher, I have never heard of him letting any planet go. And although there is not half of the population, did the tens of thousands of believers who died in the square die in vain? No, their gods will avenge them. Oh, I'm curious about what made you, the second prince of Asgard, come to me, your former enemy, to kill Thanos and the Superstar." Arno looked at Loki's hateful eyes curiously. If he remembered correctly, in the original Avengers, Loki voluntarily attacked the Earth with the help of Thanos and wanted to become the master of the Earth. Loki was silent for a while, and then slowly said, "He and his men killed many of my believers on my planet, and now half of the lives of the people on that planet are in his hands. I don't believe his nonsense that he will let my planet go if he helps him invade the Earth and get the Cosmic Cube. Only when he dies can I be completely at ease. And I believe that as the master of the same planet, you will understand my feelings." Loki's words surprised him in the first part, made him feel understood in the middle part, and directly touched his heart in the last part. Master of the planet. Yes, this young man is good at talking and has a future. Seeing Arno's approving look, Loki smiled slightly and continued. And the point is, if you help me, not only will you have the scepter that can control all living things, but also the cosmic cube with infinite energy. Foolish, if you kill Supergiant, won't the cosmic cube still be mine? Yes, this is exactly in line with my request. If you kill Supergiant, you will definitely offend Thanos, and you will have to fight him sooner or later. It's better to kill him as soon as possible. This is a win-win situation, isn't it? Loki showed a triumphant smile. Arno smiled at the words and raised the wine glass in his hand to Loki. Interesting, I have to say you have a way. I agree to your request. This Loki is very interesting, completely different from the impulsive Loki who only knows how to pit his brother in the movie. I'm afraid that from the beginning when he handed the mind scepter to him, he was sure that he would help. Tony, who had been listening and silent, frowned after listening to Loki's words. He looked at Loki deeply, and finally said to Arno. Arno, there have been more and more supernatural events and even alien invasions on Earth in recent years, and each one is bigger than the other. We can't continue to be so lax, fighting on our own, and always have to rely on you to deal with those major events that will affect the world. We must establish a super alliance belonging to the Earth, so that we can handle major supernatural events in addition to you. Tony said the plan that had been in his mind for a long time. Super alliance. It seems that you have had this idea for a long time. Arno showed a strange look on his face. Is fate still going to make the Avengers appear? It's just that this time it was not formed by Nick Fury, but by Tony. Yes, I had the idea of arming the whole world with armor during the Frost Giant incident 2 years ago, but this idea is too difficult to realize. Not to mention the large number of steel armors, the amount of information that can control the crimes happening all over the world in real time is too large, and Jarvis is not capable of it yet. So I decided to set up a super alliance composed of people with special abilities to deal with the major events that are about to happen on Earth. Tony did not deny it and directly stated his plan. Arno looked indifferent. Although he felt that he could protect his own Earth well, Tony wanted to contribute himself, so let him play. He asked casually without caring. It's up to you, what is the name of this alliance? He just asked casually, because in his mind, the name of the Avengers Alliance was probably a foregone conclusion. Tony looked at Arno seriously and said slowly, the name of our alliance is the Justice League. Puff. With the sound of wine spurting out, Tony was sprayed all over his trouser pocket. It was not Arno who was sitting opposite him who was spraying, but Wade who had been eavesdropping under the table. Are you really not afraid that DC will sue you for infringement with this name? Tony looked at his soaked pants, kicked Wade who was eavesdropping under the table, and gave him a middle finger. Stupid, I acquired DC a long time ago, I am the largest shareholder of DC Comics, I can even add myself to DC Comics. Wade lay on the ground and did not forget to complain. This money power can actually cross the boundaries of the universe and directly acquire the opponent. New York. On the top of Stark Tower. In front of a machine transmitting a blue beam of light. Dr. Eric, whose eyes were abnormally white, was looking at the expanding blue space wormhole in the sky with an obsessive look. It's incredible, I didn't expect that one day I would be able to see the sky with my own eyes. The birth of the space wormhole. Quote. Hawkeye, who was responsible for protecting Dr. Eric, couldn't help but say. Congratulations, Dr. Eric. You are now the first person on Earth to create a space transmission device, and you are a well-deserved super genius. Although their minds were controlled by the superstar, they retained their normal thinking ability. This is how they can maximize their own knowledge and power. Indeed, maybe if you work hard, you can open the door to other worlds and let me go home. A naughty voice came from behind the two. Hawkeye didn't hesitate at all, turned around and shot an arrow, which was almost faster than a bullet, and there was no way to react. Swish. Puff. What an unfriendly way to greet, it reminds me of that fool Francis. Deadpool casually pulled out the arrow stuck in his forehead. Hawkeye squinted at the arrow pulled out of Deadpool's hand, and the many fallen mercenaries behind him. Deadpool. Quote. Long time no see, Hawkeye. Even if your eyes have cataracts, they are still so sharp. By the way, I have always been curious. Is it true that you can see the women's bathhouse clearly from 800 meters away? Of course it is, fake. Swish X3. 3 arrows were instantly shot by Hawkeye, shooting at Deadpool's head, heart and brother at the same time, 3 killing moves. Deadpool grabbed the heart and the 2 arrows below with both hands, and bit the arrow shot at the head with his teeth. Sometimes I really want to ask, how can you make so many facial expressions with a mask on, and even bite the arrows? Deadpool spit out the arrows in his mouth, the mask smiled evilly, and drew out the double swords. Because I am the protagonist. Swish. A fierce flame broke out on the double swords. Try my breath of fire. Quote. Deadpool held a long sword burning with fierce flames. In Hawkeye's wide eyes, he turned into a shadow and disappeared on the spot. He appeared again, holding 2 burning swords in front of him. Hawkeye's pupils shrank. It was so fast, he couldn't react at all. When did Deadpool's speed become so exaggerated? Before he could counterattack, Deadpool's sword was already close at hand. It was over. Hawkeye closed his eyes. Bang, bang. Deadpool knocked the 2 men unconscious with his plane handles. Deadpool blinked at the void. I lied to you. I don't know how to cross the dimension. My mission is completed, 10 million in hand. Next is the high-end game, which is not something a common soldier like me can participate in. Deadpool, who has a clear self-awareness, put back the 2 swords, carried the 2 fainted people and ran away happily. After Deadpool left, only the bodies of the mercenaries who were controlled by the superstar to protect Dr. Eric were left on the roof. Deadpool's mission was to bring back Hawkeye and Dr. Eric alive, and Natasha would personally sponsor him with a reward of 10 million. But she had more important things to do. Roar. After the huge space wormhole expanded to a certain extent, a roar that did not belong to any creature on Earth came from the blue space wormhole. The citizens of New York City, who were somewhat curious about the sudden appearance of the wormhole, panicked when they heard this terrifying roar. The helicopters of major news agencies that were originally hovering below the hole were shaking. The fighter planes that the military had already prepared were about to take off when they heard the sound, but the military leaders received a video call. Nick Fury immediately stopped the generals who were about to order the takeoff. Generals, our fighter planes don't need to give up their lives, let them stay on standby. Who do you think you are, Nick Fury? You don't have the control of the military. Oh, of course I know that, what about him? Nick Fury's screen disappeared, followed by a high-definition, uncensored 8K wormhole video broadcast live by S.H.I.E.L.D.'s on-site agents using black technology equipment. In front of the space wormhole that was still expanding and vaguely visible with something about to pour out, there were a few tiny figures that could not be seen without careful observation. As the video screen zoomed in, the few people standing in the air in front of the wormhole were clearly seen by the military leaders. They waved their hands and ordered, "It's okay, the crisis is over, let the pilots go off work, go home for lunch, and don't stay on standby." Nick Fury, you are more sincere than me. In front of the wormhole, Arno, Thor, and Tony were chatting leisurely while waiting for the wormhole to open completely, without any sense of tension. Arno was confident because of his strong strength. Thor was a veteran of many battles and was already accustomed to such scenes. Tony had unlimited confidence in his brother, so he didn't care at all. Tony looked at the Stark Tower information sent by Jarvis on the screen. By the way, the superstar that Loki mentioned has never appeared. She didn't even show up for such an important matter as opening the space wormhole. Shouldn't we care about her? Don't worry, I've asked Kaya and Wanda to find her. I believe we'll find her soon. And even if we don't find her, it doesn't matter. After we kill all the invaders, I don't believe she can hide all the time. Arno said calmly, then looked at Thor. What do you think, Thor? Do you want to see who kills more enemies? Come, who's afraid of who? Thor roared with a lack of confidence. It was really because Arno's freezing of tens of thousands of frost giants in one breath last time shocked him too much. Although he was very confident in his own strength, he didn't dare to say that he could destroy tens of thousands of frost giants in one breath. Even if he drained the power of Thor in his body, he couldn't do it. But a real man can't say no. Thor clenched his hammer and stared at the space wormhole. As the wormhole expanded to a certain extent, a large number of Chitauri pioneers riding on flying vehicles rushed out of it. But before they could see the outside scene clearly, the exposed head was destroyed by a red laser, dozens of small missiles, and a lightning. It was killed in seconds. Roar. As if it had sensed that its vanguard army had been destroyed, a huge roar came from the wormhole. Then a huge and hideous head emerged from the wormhole. Wow, this guy is really amazing, big and ugly, who will come? Tony raised his eyebrows, looking at the Chitauri beast that almost filled the entire cave entrance with a little surprise. I'll do it, Thor shouted, holding up Mjolnir. Boom. A huge thunderbolt instantly hit the Chitauri beast, emitting a burning smell. The body of the Chitauri beast was cut in half by the Space Force at the edge of the wormhole. Only the exposed charred head fell to the ground, and the rest of the body fell back into the wormhole. Roar. XN. At the moment the beast died, more huge roars came. The roar was full of strong anger. The space wormhole that had expanded to a stable level that could pass two Chitauri beasts suddenly flew out of the dense Chitauri army that was like a locust crossing. Behind them, several giant Chitauri beasts rushed out of the wormhole one after another. They were determined to tear apart the three little bugs that dared to stand in front of the invincible Chitauri army. The game officially begins. Arno chuckled and looked at the Chitauri army that was rushing in like a black torrent. Thor's eyes lit up with red and white lightning, and the hand holding the hammer was filled with thunder. Begin, Thor shouted loudly, and was the first to summon countless thunders to bombard the cave entrance. For a moment, he really made the entire Chitauri army unable to cross the thunder pool by himself. In the sky, except for the blue and white lightning, there were only corpses that were charred by the violent thunder falling like raindrops. Really good special effects, no wonder you were called gods in ancient times. Arno clapped his hands and admired sincerely. Compared with the visual effect, Thor's thunder that filled the sky with thunder was indeed more shocking than his simple superpower, heat vision and freezing breath. But simplicity depends on who uses it. Arno took a deep breath, and then a cold current that could freeze everything spit out from Arno's mouth in a fan shape. Wherever the cold current passed, both the Chitauri cavalry and the Chitauri beasts were turned into ice sculptures. For a while, charred corpses and human-shaped hail continued to rain from the sky. Oh, they are really two primitive guys. Jarvis, let them see the shock from the machine, and let Veronica send down Unit 2. Tony chuckled and issued an order to Jarvis. The Veronica satellite not only carries the original Hulkbuster Unit 1, which is the power armor used to deal with Whiplash. In the past 2 years, Tony has added a more powerful and lethal guy to Veronica. That is the Unit 2 he just mentioned. With his order, Veronica in space immediately dropped a flight cabin that was much larger than the Hulkbuster armored flight cabin. During the rapid fall, the flight cabin began to disintegrate and separate before approaching New York. Countless small aircraft separated from the huge flight cabin, and then missiles were fired from the aircraft towards the space wormhole. This is not over yet. The remaining parts of the flight cabin flew to Tony one by one and were assembled in front of him. Finally, a huge and sci-fi gun barrel was formed. Let you try my latest masterpiece. Super electromagnetic gun. Z. The blue electric light flashed and accumulated power in the gun barrel. Bang. With a dull burst of electric light, a 2-meter-long steel needle with powerful kinetic energy at a speed almost invisible to the naked eye, instantly penetrated countless Chitauri troops. Rumble. Wherever the steel needle went, a series of explosions occurred along the way, and the scene was extremely fast and spectacular. Such a big movement, of course, attracted everyone's attention. The news agency helicopter, which was just about to run away, immediately rose and took pictures desperately. Superman, Thor, Iron Man. Life is not as important as the headlines. Wardfa. Wardfa. Two incredible voices came out from two different places at the same time. The old Captain America, who was accompanying Carter Peggy in a hospital, was watching the TV with a confused look on his face. The Chitauri army that was completely stopped by 3 people was full of surprise in his eyes. Is he old and confused, or is this universe supposed to be like this? This is not in line with the script. Back then, he and Tony and others fought desperately to limit the scope of the war to New York City, and they were almost blown up by a nuclear bomb. Looking at the 3 people who easily slaughtered the 3 people in the Chitauri army, the old Steve felt that he might have fallen behind the times because he had not paid attention to the news outside for too long. It seems that old dang, I'm out of date. Times have changed. On the other side, in an alley, 4 figures in white shuttle suits looked at the clean and tidy streets and the lively crowds who kept taking pictures of the sky. The nano shuttle suits on the 4 people disappeared, revealing their original appearance. It was Iron Man, Tony Stark, Captain America, Steve Rogers, Dr. Hulk, Bruce Banner, and a passerby. Steve frowned and looked at the neat streets around him. Did we come at the wrong time? Tony shook his head and said affirmatively. Impossible, the positioning bracelet I made will never go wrong. This is made by him, there is no way there will be a product problem. Banner, who was responsible for debugging the time, scratched his head and said uncertainly. Did I set the time wrong? Passerby A, Ant-Man, and Scott Lang had different focus on the positioning bracelet. He curiously looked up at the sky along with the giant's line of sight. The next moment, Scott was stunned, asked mechanically. Guys, although I didn't participate in the New York War in 2012, but, should it be like that? The 3 people who were still studying the positioning bracelets on their hands heard a shudder in their hearts and slowly looked up at the sky. Ward Law, Tony exclaimed. Steve couldn't help but said, don't swear. Tony, oh my god, Tony, you look so domineering in this universe. Banner, who has merged with Hulk, looked at the sky and exclaimed heartfeltly at Iron Man holding a huge electromagnetic cannon. Scott looked at the 3 people who were shocked and asked weakly, isn't this normal? I think this is abnormal. Tony looked at Scott with a caring look for the mentally retarded and said helplessly. I'm afraid the situation in this universe is completely different from the universe we are in. I've said it before, this is not time travel. We just went to other parallel timeline universes, and anything can happen in it. After Tony explained to Scott, he couldn't help but admire himself in this universe. But I have to say, I'm so handsome in this universe. Why didn't I think of the super electromagnetic gun? Do you think Thanos can withstand the super electromagnetic gun? The other 3 looked at each other, and finally looked back at Tony. You are an expert in mechanics, why are you asking us? Tony shook his head. Why would he ask these wooden guys? Except for Banner, the other 2 probably don't even know what the super electromagnetic gun is. He then stopped thinking about this question. After all, the Thanos of their universe has been beheaded by Thor, so even if the electromagnetic cannon can kill Thanos, it is meaningless. The most important thing now is to secretly borrow the Infinity Stones and bring back half of the creatures lost in their universe. But Tony looked at the tall figure next to himself in this universe in the sky, and always felt that this borrowing stone journey would not be so smooth. Stephen pondered for a while, and finally decided to implement the original plan. Let's proceed with the original plan first. Tony and Scott waited for Thor to get the cosmic cube and prepared to take it back to Asgard, and created an opportunity to take the cosmic cube in the chaos. Hulk went to the New York temple to borrow the time stone from Strange. I went to get the mind scepter that would be taken away by Hydra later. If there is any accident on the way, we will respond accordingly. But we only have one chance, so we must get the original stone at all costs. That's the only way. The other 3 had no objection to this and began to act separately. On the other side, New York, 200 meters underground. In a secret laboratory deep underground, a green big-headed monster with white eyes was drooling and looking crazy. Success. I finally succeeded. With the help of the infinite energy extracted by the supergiant from the cosmic cube, Sirio Stern, the head of the invincible Hulk, finally succeeded in mass-producing a low-profile version of the Hulk. Although the individual power is not as good as the Hulk, he has more and is completely under his control. Moreover, although he is not as good as the original Hulk, he is not bragging. Any little Hulk here can beat Captain America. Now as long as he wants, this power can even allow him to overthrow the regime of a country. Just as he fell into his dream, a slender woman walked out of the corner in the dark. She was wearing a white hooded battlesuit, her skin was blue, and her pupils were all white. Since it's successful, let the children go out for some fresh air. The supergiant spoke slowly, and his seductive voice sounded in Stern's ears. She had noticed Loki's hateful look towards her, so she didn't trust him at all. If her father hadn't insisted on letting her take Loki with him for some reason, she would have killed this fake smiling boy with a hypocritical smile. So she wouldn't put her hopes on Loki, She wanted to cause more trouble for the so-called superheroes on Earth. A trace of struggle flashed in Sten's eyes, but he soon nodded obediently. Okay, Master, I'll put the children on the ground. He pressed a red button, and suddenly countless noises rang out in the empty underground laboratory. In the experimental chambers filled with green liquid, hundreds of people injected with Hulk serum opened their eyes full of violent emotions. Just as Sten was about to issue an order to let them go to the ground to start destruction. Ta ta ta. The crisp footsteps sounded again from the darkness, and Supergiant and Sten were suddenly startled. This is Sten's secret base, and Supergiant accidentally discovered it because of his powerful telepathy. Besides the two of them, there were only those zombies whose minds had been wiped out and whose violent consciousness remained. How could there be anyone else? With telepathy emanating from her, Superstar's face changed drastically. Her perception clearly told her that the footsteps came from there was nothing in the direction. But this was obviously impossible, the footsteps were almost stepping on her face. There was only one possibility, the other party's spiritual power was stronger than hers, at least not lower than hers. Ta! Finally, a figure slowly walked out of the darkness in the eyes of Superstar and Sten. A blonde, red-dressed, expressionless girl appeared. Sten saw that it was just an ordinary, even a little weak woman, and his expression suddenly became fierce. Who are you? How dare you come here? Bang! Before Sten finished speaking, the huge head suddenly exploded, and green blood and brain matter exploded all over the Superstar next to him. Supervillain, leader, pawn. What? Superstar felt the warmth on his face full of disbelief. She didn't even sense it, and the leader next to her was shot in the head. What a terrible head-exploding woman. HMPH. But your trick won't work on me. And you're too late. Superstar snorted coldly, and the mental barrier prevented the telekinetic attack of the three-no girl opposite, which was similar to Ebony Maw. Then the mind control was launched, intending to control the large number of low-profile Hulks made by Sten to use the human wave tactics to kill the woman in front of her who made her extremely afraid. But after the mind control swept the entire base, she was horrified to find that not a single Hulk was awake. Could the activated scene she just saw be illusion? Superstar's eyes widened, and the mental power in his brain condensed into a needle, poking forward with all his strength. In an instant, the space poked by the mental needle was distorted, and the invisible air turned into crimson mist and slowly dissipated. The scene in front of her returned to reality. But the reality was more terrifying to her than the illusion. Sten was really shot to death. But except for the blonde woman just now. Next to her, there was a woman with strange red light in her eyes, who was connecting her limbs with several red energy threads. These seemingly thin red threads made her whole body unable to move. It was her. This woman cast an illusion on me and controlled me. She didn't expect that she, who had been playing with mind control for her whole life, would be controlled by others one day. Who are you? The Supergiant had exhausted all his mental power to break Wanda's chaos magic, and his body was also bound. He could only look at the two people with fear in his eyes. Wanda politely replied, Scarlet Witch, Wanda. Kaya just glanced at the Supergiant. Bang! With a few muffled sounds, the Supergiant's limbs and tongue exploded into a ball of blood mist. After the Supergiant completely lost the ability to move, Kia waved his hands, and countless sounds of breaking through the air were heard. One by one, green little giants over 2 meters tall and sleeping flew from all directions. Although Kia had no expression on her face at the moment, Wanda felt a strong sense of anger from her. This was the first time she felt such intense emotions from this woman. As hundreds of green little giants were suspended in the air by Kia, a flash of painful memories appeared in her eyes. Experimental subject. War machine that erased its own thoughts. Just like her before. But you are not as lucky as me. You met your own god before your thoughts were completely erased. So, rest in peace. Kia bowed slightly, and the pain in her eyes disappeared after she raised her head. She became calm again, and slowly clenched her right hand. With her movements, hundreds of green giants floating in the air suddenly gathered together, forming a huge green meatball. Then, bang! Dark green blood exploded all over the laboratory. But the blood was blocked by an invisible barrier within 1 meter of Kia and Wanda. Let's go, our mission is complete. Kia raised her hand slightly, and the supergiant who had lost his limbs and tongue hung beside her and walked out slowly. With every step, the sticky green blood on the ground would automatically avoid her, so that she never got a trace of blood on her body. Wanda came back to her senses from the shock, her hands shone with red light, and then flew towards Kia. But she was still a little confused in her heart. Didn't she say that she was just here to catch the supergiant? No one told me that there would be such a bloody scene. When the two took the elevator in the underground secret passage back to the ground, there was a sudden violent tremor underground. Wanda looked at Kia next to her with a sense of something. Kia controlled the supergiant, squeezed her broken limbs with telekinesis, spilled blood on the ground, and said in a cold voice, "This will become your grave." This is the only thing she can do for these test subjects. Over New York, as the three people competed, the number of Chitauri troops pouring out of the space wormhole became smaller and smaller. Arno glanced at Kia and Wanda, who were returning to the manor with the supergiant, and smiled with satisfaction. "I believe Loki in the manor will like this gift." Yes, it was Arno who asked Kia and Wanda to go to this secret base hidden deep underground in New York. Although the supergiant used her psychic ability to block her own existence, he couldn't find it for a while. But she couldn't block everything. Arno just glanced around and found this huge underground experimental base in New York, which was extremely conspicuous in his eyes, including the hundreds of little greens inside. At this juncture, this base appeared here. It was like looking for death in the toilet. Regardless of whether it was related to the supergiant, Arno was not going to let it go. So she sent Kia and Wanda to check it out. Of course, the tasks she gave them were completely different. The task for Wanda was just to let her try to find the supergiant, mainly to let her practice her courage with Kia. The task for Kia was different, just one word: kill. Obviously, Kia completed the task very well. Not only did he find the supergiant, but he also wiped out all the transformed monsters in the underground of New York, and even the base was razed. He simply exceeded the task, and the score should be SSS. Now that the supergiant has been found, the matter should be over. Red and orange light appeared under Arno's silver-gray battle suit, and the temperature around him began to rise. Destruction mode, the initial stage begins. We found the superstar. No more playing. Thor, guard the entrance. Tony, bring the mind scepter to close the wormhole. I'll go to their mothership to take a look. Arno didn't need a bioforce field to isolate the burning breath from his body. After giving the order, he flew into the wormhole like a little sun with a stream of red and orange light and rushed towards the mothership of the Chitauri. He didn't need to attack the Chitauri cavalry along the way. As long as they approached him, they would be burned to ashes by his increasingly hot breath. Including the Chitauri monster, which was directly hit by Arno like tofu, and a charred hole was made. Soon he arrived at the mothership of the Chitauri army. Thanos's Temple 1. But unfortunately, there was no Thanos in Temple 1. There was only a so-called king of the Chitauri. The old guy was still very hard-mouthed and said a lot of harsh words. Even if he was beaten and screamed, he still said that I would not tell you anything, but not where Thanos was. In the end, Arno impatiently crushed him to death. This old guy might not know Thanos, says it would be more practical to ask her adopted daughter Superstar about her whereabouts after returning to the manor. As for whether she will tell it or not, it is not up to her. I believe that whether it is Wanda's mental torture, her own physical torture, or Wade's mental and physical torture, Superstar can speak obediently. Since Thanos is not here, there is no point in staying here. The hot eyes burst out, and in an instant, Thanos's Temple Number 1 was turned into a ball of fire. The moment Temple Number 1 exploded, the remaining Chitauri army lost consciousness and died instantly as if they had lost the signal. Thor, who was squatting at the entrance of the cave, breathed a sigh of relief, put away the lightning, and flew down. Good guy, he kept discharging electricity here to show off, and almost drained his divine power. Seeing Arno fly out of the space wormhole, knowing that the matter was over, Tony held the mind scepter and pushed it into the space transmission device. As the blue light column disappeared, the space wormhole gradually shrank and then closed. Arno slowly descended and directly picked up the cosmic cube emitting blue light from the instrument with his bare hands. Cosmic cube, space gem. Arno looked at the blue cube in his hand curiously, wondering whether to crush the shell of the space gem. Two tough guys, we have saved the Earth again. Let's have a drink together and celebrate a little. Tony took out a bottle of wine and 3 glasses from the rooftop bar and poured them for the 3 people. Upon hearing this, Arno threw the cosmic cube on the bar and took a sip of wine. A glass of wine afterwards, live more than 99. Just as the 3 of them were drinking a little wine leisurely, Arno's ears moved slightly. Tony, something is wrong. The Hydra Special Forces did not come to take the Mind Scepter, and Pierce did not come either. Future Tony, hiding behind the wall, looked at the cosmic cube on the table and himself in this universe playing with the Mind Scepter, his heart pounding. The 2 stones were within reach, and Tony in the future could not give up this great opportunity. Tony in the future whispered, "Captain, I have both stones. I want to try to get them together." Tony, don't be impulsive. However, Tony in the future did not wait for Steve to finish and directly cut off the communication. Thumbelina, did you see the tallest man? I found out through the network of this universe that he is my brother in this universe. I will now bounce you to me in this universe, and you go to unplug the reactor line on my chest. While he is busy saving me in this universe, I will take the 2 stones in the chaos. Do you understand? Ant-Man, whose shoulders were shrunk to the size of an ant, swallowed his saliva. Although he was very scared, he still mustered up the courage to say, "Although I don't think this is a good idea, but for hope, fight." Okay, then I'll count to 3, ready, 3. Tony in the future did not follow martial ethics, and directly counted to 3 and bounced Ant-Man to Tony. Ah! Ant-Man screamed like a mosquito in the air, but quickly adjusted his posture in the air and dived towards Tony. Seeing that he was getting closer and closer to Tony, Tony in the future and the Ant-Man in the air all smiled happily. Durr! A crisp and pleasant sound of falling into the water sounded, and Ant-Man fell into a wine glass with a 100-point diving standard. Arno shook the wine glass in his hand, and Ant-Man, who was already submerged in the wine, was dizzy for a while. Come out for a drink, Tony from the future. Tony, holding a wine glass, pointed at himself in confusion. Me. Before Arno could speak, a familiar voice came from behind Tony. No, he was talking about me. Future Tony slowly walked out from behind the wall. Puff! Tony spit out a mouthful of wine and stared at Future Tony with wide eyes. Wardfa, who are you? Future Tony said helplessly. I am you, the future you in another parallel universe. Parallel universe? That's interesting, how do you prove it? Tony raised his eyebrows, raised his right hand to Future Tony, and his palm lit up with a lava-like red light. As long as the next answer of this fake did not satisfy him, he promised to give him a passionate fire bath package. At the same time, the Mk7 armor that he had unblocked and put on standby beside him also followed his action and aimed the palm cannon at Future Tony. Arno did not stop this, leaning on the bar and watching the show with interest. Tony and Future Tony's century-long meeting, this is not in the original book. Future Tony didn't care about Mk7 aimed at him, but frowned and looked at the red light flowing on Tony's arm. Extremis virus, you injected Extremis virus. Shut up, this has nothing to do with you. Tony yelled at Future Tony, and couldn't help turning his head to look at the armor beside him. Jarvis, why are there outsiders around? You didn't tell me. Mk7 turned his head to look at him, and Tony actually saw a touch of humanized doubt from the cold eye display of the armor. Sir, because according to my scan, he is you. Except that the physical state is expected to be your state 10 years later without taking the Extremis potion. No matter which aspect, it shows that he is you. Tony opened his mouth and was speechless for a while. Although he absolutely trusted Jarvis, this test result was too outrageous. Okay, don't embarrass Jarvis. It's actually very easy to prove that I am you. Future Tony looked at Mk7, or Jarvis who controlled Mk7, with his eyes full of memories. He tapped his chest with his fingers, and countless nanoparticles poured out from the storage core on his chest. In just a moment, a set of streamlined armor with more red and gold as a supplement appeared on the body of Future Tony. A slightly mechanical voice came from the armor of Future Tony. Except for ourselves, no one can make such a delicate armor, right? Tony looked at the nano armor on Future Tony in surprise, and finally smacked his lips and said, Okay, you convinced me. This beautiful masterpiece can only be made by a genius like me. So the future me, this is nanomaterial, right? What generation of armor is this? It's no wonder that he believed the other party so easily. It's really that the nano armor on the opposite side that only exists in his mind can never be made by anyone else except himself in the future. Future Tony took off the nano armor on his body, curled his lips, and said with some pride. Yes, this is nano metal, MK85, my latest masterpiece. Tony nodded in praise, poured a glass of wine for future Tony, and handed it to him. Not bad. It seems that no matter which universe I am in, I am the same genius, which is almost the same as what I thought of nano armor. Future Tony took the wine from Tony and was stunned. Huh, you have the idea of nano armor now. You should know that he had the idea of nano armor after being inspired by Zhao Hailun's life cradle during the Ultron incident. And now, there are still 3 years before the Ultron incident, and 6 years before the first generation of nano armor is manufactured. In fact, I had this idea 4 years ago. However, due to technical limitations, it cannot be made yet. But I have some ideas. I believe that it will not be long before my own nano armor will be on the stage. Tony also heard from the words of the future Tony that the other party must not have even had the idea of nano armor at his time, and he couldn't help but feel a little proud. It seems that although the self in each universe is a genius, the self in this universe is always the most talented one. However, he did not consult his future self about the production equation of nano armor. Because he has his pride, he does not need to use anyone's armor plan for reference, even the future self. He believes that the nano armor that belongs to him in the future will be better than the nano armor made by himself in any universe. Okay, let's stop chatting here, so the future me, you don't hesitate to travel to a parallel timeline and go back to the past, why? Although Tony still has a lot of things to talk to his future self, Buddha also knew that his future self must have traveled through time because of something important. He knew that time was a double-edged sword. When you play with time, time will also play with you. So he would not travel to other timelines unless it was absolutely necessary. For the scepter in your hand, and the cosmic cube next to my brother. Future Tony pointed to the mind scepter in Tony's hand, and looked at Arno with a strange look in his eyes. I didn't expect that I had a brother in this universe. And looking at his performance in blocking the space wormhole, it is obviously not as simple as an ordinary person. Frozen breath, thermal vision, and even able to survive in space. How can this be so similar to? Boom! A loud noise interrupted the thoughts of future Tony. Tony, I'm here to help you. A strong man holding a shield broke the door and rushed in. Steve looked at the two Tonys, and the strange looks that Arno and Thor gave him. Even though he could fight all day, he felt a little embarrassed at this moment. Why is the scene so harmonious? He thought a fight had started. He winked at the future Tony and whispered, Tony, what's going on? Where's Scott? Thor, who was oblivious to the outside world and focused only on the bottle, burped and asked in confusion. Burp, why are you whispering so secretly? We can all hear it, right? Future Tony covered his face and couldn't help thinking, what kind of teammates are these? 3 teammates in a 4-person team. Except for himself, one is mentally retarded, the other is a bit nervous, and only Banner is a little reliable. Bang! Speak of the devil is here. Sparks lit up, and a portal opened. Hulk's not-so-tall body was thrown out of the portal. Ancient One, wearing a black wizard robe and drinking a drink leisurely in his hand, walked out of the portal. She smiled slightly. It seems that I came at the right time. All the uninvited guests in this universe are here. Steve frowned and unconsciously clenched his shield. Who are you? What did you do to Banner? Ancient One said lightly, me. Just an ordinary Supreme Sorcerer. Steve was even more confused. Supreme Sorcerer? Isn't that strange? You are talking about him. He is not the Supreme Sorcerer yet. It should be said that he is not even a wizard. If you follow the timeline of your universe, you came 5 years early. And for this universe, he is now dating his girlfriend. Whether he will become a wizard in the future is not certain. Ancient One said at the end and looked at Arno meaningfully. Arno ignored her look. He certainly knew what the Ancient One meant. If he accepted the position of the Sorcerer Supreme, there would be no strange in the future. After all, with the Supreme Superman, why would he need the Sorcerer Supreme? But even if he really wanted to be the Sorcerer Supreme for fun one day, he probably wouldn't keep doing it. Sooner or later, a successor would be chosen, and Strange was a good worker. Looking at Captain America, who didn't understand the situation, Ant-Man who had fainted in the wine glass, and the unconscious Hulk, Tony sighed tiredly in the future, put down the wine glass in his hand, stood up, and said to the Ancient One, "We came here mainly for the Mind Scepter, the Cosmic Cube, and the Eye of Agamotto hanging on your chest. We need these 3 items to save our world." The Ancient One picked up the Eye of Agamotto after hearing this, then shook his head and pointed at Arno. "Are you talking about this?" "Well, no, I can't make a decision. You have to ask the current Lord of the Earth." Future Tony rubbed his brows when he heard this. What happened in this universe is completely different from the universe he is in. It is even more different from the plan they made to borrow gems. And all this seems to be related to his brother in this universe. He glanced at Tony, who was squatting beside Dr. Hulk curiously, with a hint of envy in his eyes. That's great, he saw it from the beginning. The self in this universe is completely different from him. Cheerful, optimistic, without any anxiety. This is completely different from the self who has become more and more closed since his parents passed away. Because the self in this universe still has relatives and a powerful brother. So as a younger brother, he can have nothing to worry about. He looked at Arno, who was still watching the show, and slowly said, "Arno, can I call you that?" "Of course, but if you are willing to call me brother, I am also happy to do so." Future Tony, seeing his speechless expression, Arno stopped teasing him and went straight to the point. "Just kidding, I know, you want to borrow 3 stones to bring back the lost half of the population in your universe, right?" "How do you know?" Future Tony's pupils trembled. He never talked about the infinite stones, he talked about the names of the stone containers from beginning to end. It is because the influence of the infinite stones is too great, he does not want the news of the stones to appear on the earth of this universe too early, which may lead to the early occurrence of this universe disaster. Arno picked up the cosmic cube, shook it casually, and said leisurely, "Their containers can only conceal the narrow vision of ordinary people. In the eyes of the real strong, its true body has never been able to hide." Click. Arno crushed the cosmic cube with one hand, and blue debris flowed out from his fingers. His palm opened, and only a gem emitting blue light was left lying quietly in Arno's palm. Future Tony watched this scene with a twitch in his mouth. Could it be more outrageous? He crushed the cosmic cube with his bare hands and took the space stone directly in his hand. You should know that the surface of each infinity stone carries strong energy radiation, although the energy is different. But without exception, the energy emitted by the 6 stones is absolutely not something that humans can bear. He estimated that even if he wore Mk85, it would be difficult for him to bear the power of the stones. The last person who could pick up the stones with his bare hands was Thanos, who almost made them despair. Arno didn't feel much about it. He just felt the warmth in his palms, and a gentle energy was constantly seeping into his body from the space stone. Harmless, and there was a strange sense of comfort. And with the space gem in his hand, he could clearly feel any tiny fluctuations in the surrounding space. He had a feeling that now, as long as he wanted, he could instantly go anywhere he wanted to go. Space power. Arno looked at the space gem in his palm and whispered. Then he looked at the mind scepter in Tony's hand. What effect would the mind gem have? "Give me the mind scepter." Although Tony was puzzled by the space gem emitting blue light in Arno's hand, he still handed the scepter to Arno obediently. The same trick was used again. Arno crushed the blue crystal inlaid on the mind scepter with 2 fingers, revealing its true appearance inside. A gem emitting yellow light. Mind gem. He held the mind gem in his other hand, and a bright yellow energy spread throughout his body. The super brain seemed to become clearer, and the supervision and hearing unconsciously released. All the sounds and pictures in the world the surface was almost instantly transmitted to Arno's mind. But this time Arno did not have the boredom of having his brain squeezed by countless information. Now even if the sounds and pictures from all over the world are transmitted to his mind at the same time, his mind is still clear. And now he does not need to screen the targets he wants to hear or see one by one. Just a thought, the pictures he wants to see will automatically filter into his mind, and block the things he does not want to see. The places he can hear and see are now wider, and his hearing and vision have begun to extend beyond the earth. The most important thing is that the magic resistance that was originally enhanced by the destruction suit, the moment he held the Mind Stone in his hand. Arno had a feeling that his spiritual world had become indestructible. And this was not an illusion. But his mind really became indestructible under the amplification of the Mind Stone. Destruction suit, Space Stone, Mind Stone. Unknowingly, he has become much stronger than before. He unconsciously looked at the Time Stone on Ancient One's chest. If time is added, then he will reach various levels. Ancient One noticed his sight and shook his finger at him. No, this is a good magic weapon. I can't crush it for you. If you want the Time Stone, I can teach you how to open it. As he said, Ancient One pinched his fingers and the eye of Agamotto burst into brilliant green light, almost illuminating the entire top floor. This is much brighter than the light of the Space Stone and the Mind Stone. Arno was a little confused. Is this normal? A trace of surprise flashed in Ancient One's eyes, but he immediately regained his calm. Under her control, the Time Stone slowly broke away from the eye of Agamotto and flew towards Arno. Arno saw this and directly held the two gems in his left hand together, and took the flying Time Stone with his right hand. The moment Arno's palm touched the Time Stone, the green light overshadowed the blue and yellow colors on his body. And the time around him seemed to stand still. Unlike the relative stillness when he used super speed, time completely stopped flowing. The next moment, the green power of time carried countless information from the time gem into his brain. Stop, rewind, speed up, predict and other uses of the time gem continued to enter his mind. In a sea of green information, the last blurry figure entangled with countless dark green lines appeared in Arno's mind. Arno looked at his somewhat illusory hands, a little surprised. This feeling is similar to entering the world of WandaVision, a soul. Then he looked around the dark green space, and finally looked up at the person on the high platform in the distance who was entangled by countless dark green lines. The vague figure seemed to look down at him from the high throne. The two looked at each other. It was you who dragged yourself into this place, right? He slightly blurred his eyes and found that his supervision could not see the other person's appearance at all, just like an unzipped 360p video. Arno's soul body floated into the air. Since he couldn't see clearly, he would fight with the other person at close range until he was high definition. However, before Arno could get close to challenge the other party took the lead. He raised his right hand, and 3 infinite gems floated in his hand. He gently pinched a gem and flicked it towards Arno, hitting his forehead in an instant. Mind. The mind gem that entered his brain immediately emitted a fierce mental storm that swept through his mind. Yellow light burst out from Arno's soul body. But this not only did not make him feel pain, but he felt his mental power rising steadily, and his brain felt an unprecedented sense of comfort. It seemed that his mental power was matching his physical strength. If his previous strength was S+ and his mental power was A, then his mental power was now successfully upgraded to S level after the mental storm swept through. And it is still increasing. I believe it will be on par with his physical strength in a short time. Mind is no longer his shortcoming. And the increase in mental power is not temporary. If he could use the power of the mind gem to temporarily increase his mental power when he just got the mind gem, then now the mind gem has merged with him and is constantly and permanently strengthening his mental power. In other words, even if the mind gem is no longer in his hands one day, this enhanced mental power will not disappear. The strengthened mental power has become a part of him. The mental storm dissipated, Arno took a long breath, and the yellow light on his soul body began to dim. But he didn't wait for him to rest for a moment. Then, he picked up the green time gem and flicked it towards himself. Time. The green time gem also entered Arno's brain through his forehead, and then his whole body radiated a soft green glow. To be honest, he didn't like this color very much. But in the same way, the power of time also merged into his soul. Although it was not as obvious as the mind gem that gave him a huge increase in mental strength. But the power of time also began to appear in his body, allowing him to use the power of time to a certain extent even if he left the time gem. For example, if Tony's chest was blown out with a big hole now, he would not have to ask others or himself to remove the shrapnel for Tony. He could directly use the power of time and use time to go back to restore his injured part to a small area before the injury. You can also use the power of time to accelerate time and make long-lived races like Thor age quickly. The cost is just that it will consume his power. As for how much it consumes, it depends on the specific things. The stronger the existence, the longer the time of retracing or accelerating, and the more power it consumes. When it becomes powerful to a certain extent, such as an existence with the same power as him, then the power of time that he has mastered will be useless. But it is also very good. The power of time and the power of space are one of the most difficult powers to master. Especially the power of time, like the one he has mastered, which only consumes energy and has no side effects, there are even fewer. He is still very satisfied. It comes for free, it's good to have it, what else do you want? Well, it's really good. Continue. Arno looked at the vague figure on the high platform with satisfaction, raised his chin and signaled with his eyes, asking him to throw the remaining space gems to him, so that he can see what surprises there are. He couldn't help thinking, does he also have a system? This is the system that brought him to Marvel to compensate him, a novice benefit that is more than 40 years late. Otherwise, who would be so kind as to give yourself benefits for no apparent reason? When you are walking on the street, will someone give you $100 for no apparent reason? Impossible. It is confirmed, it is the system. As expected, a time traveler without a system has an incomplete life. I sense the random thoughts in Arno's mind, a certain story god. He picked up the last blue space gem. But he did not immediately bounce it towards Arno like the previous two, but lowered his head and stared for a while. Destiny. He sighed softly, and the deep green light in his palm penetrated into the blue gem. Finally, he flicked his finger, and the space gem turned into a blue stream of light and hit Arno's forehead. Arno instantly realized that something was wrong. Why did the space gem that bounced this time still have a tail flame? Dwang. Different from the gentleness of the previous two times. This time the entry of the space gem was as violent as a nuclear bomb exploding on Arno's forehead. In reality, time returned to normal. Boom! A blue light flashed on Arno's forehead, and the whole person flew backwards, smashing a thick wall with a boom. Bang! In the stunned eyes of the crowd, Arno expressionlessly lifted the rubble on his body and walked out of the smoke and dust. This is definitely a personal grudge, I will remember you, kid. As for the power of the space gem, it was integrated into his soul as expected. And he felt a little different from when he first got the space gem. But he couldn't tell where it was different. Ji Yuyi looked at the frustrated Arno, and his calm expression showed a faint smile. Tony was the first to step forward, looking at Arno's slightly red forehead with some concern. What happened? What happened to the blue light that exploded on your forehead just now? He knew very well how thick his brother's skin was. It's no exaggeration to say that even a nuclear bomb couldn't blow him a red mark, but now he was blown out of a red mark by a blue light. It's okay, it's just a small accident when studying the raw stone. Arno just waved his hand and didn't say much more. He didn't know what was going on. Was that blurry figure the system, OA, or some higher existence? He himself hadn't figured it out yet. But the one who could make the infinite stones merge with him, and he couldn't resist it at all, was definitely not an existence he could deal with now. Even he couldn't do it, and telling Tony would only increase his worries. And the other party obviously had no ill intentions, otherwise with his ability, he would probably be able to kill him easily. Since the other party had no ill intentions, why did he care so much now? Wouldn't it be better to care about it when he was strong enough? Future Tony stepped forward nervously, looking at Arno's empty hands, and his tone was a little panicked. Arno, where are the stones? They won't be lost again, right? Future Tony was stunned after he finished speaking. Oh, why did I say again? Don't worry, the stones are still here with me. Arno glanced at him, and 3 stones appeared in his hand. They have been integrated into his soul and can exist in reality or in his soul as he wishes. Future Tony looked at the 3 raw stones with shining eyes. He was about to say something but stopped. For a moment, he was embarrassed to speak to his brother. Wait, he doesn't seem to be my brother either. Has he been in the parallel universe for too long and his brain started to get confused? Why do I always have strange ideas today? Of course, Arno knew that he wanted to borrow his raw stones, and said directly. I can lend you the raw stones, but I have a condition. Future Tony subconsciously asked, "What condition?" "The condition is that I will go to your universe with you, and after you save your universe, I will personally bring my 3 raw stones back to my universe." Tony was stunned after hearing this, thinking that Arno was planning to go with him because he was worried about the safety of the stones, and couldn't help but explain. "You are worried that we can't send the stones back safely afterwards, right? You don't have to worry about this at all. The crisis in our universe has been resolved. Thanos has been beheaded by Thor in our universe, and this time we borrowed the stones just to bring back half of the lost creatures. It won't be dangerous, we will send them back to you as soon as we use them." Thor on the side heard this, took a sip of wine and said happily. Hiccup, haha, it seems that the me in another universe is not weaker than me, and actually cut off Thanos who killed half of the creatures in the universe. Ha ha ha. Future Tony hesitated to speak, not knowing whether he should tell Thor how painful it was for him in another universe to become powerful. And Arno smiled slightly. "Crisis resolved. It's far from resolved. If I don't go with you, then Steven will play a trick on you. Hulk still has one hand, there is a surprise team in the sky, but you are the one who is going to give it to him." The 3 stones in Arno's hand disappeared out of thin air, and he stood with his hands behind his back, smiling and looking at the future Tony without saying a word. Seeing Arno's rogue look of, "I won't give you the stones if you don't take me with you," the future Tony rubbed his temples in distress. "Even if I agree that you can go with me, we don't have enough Pym particles. Now each of us has only 1 return Pym particle. If you want to go, you have to leave one of you in this universe." At the end of his speech, the future Tony subconsciously looked at the Ant-Man in the wine glass. "If one person really has to stay, then let's leave this kid behind. Who made him useless this time? I'll take him back after I research and make new Pym particles." Arno shook his head. "Don't bother, lend me your Pym particles." Future Tony hesitated for a moment, but still took out his Pym particles and handed them to Arno. Arno put the dark red Pym particle test tube in his palm, and a trace of green light suddenly emerged from his palm and wrapped around the entire test tube. Acceleration. As the energy in his body was lost, the Pym particles in his hand split into 2 and became 2. Future Tony rubbed his eyes, a little doubting that he was dazzled. Ancient One, who had been watching the show, exclaimed, "You are worthy of being my chosen successor. It seems that you have used the power of time well." Average, not worth mentioning. Although Arno said it was average, he showed a satisfied smile on his face. This split Pym particle was not as simple as copying and pasting. In fact, the extra Pym particle reagent in his hand was newly manufactured, not copied from the future Tony. He just studied Tony's Pym particles by partially accelerating himself, and successfully produced Pym particles. It sounds simple, but it's not complicated. For him, with the finished product, it's not difficult to study Pym particles. It's just a matter of time to produce them, and the power of time is just used to produce them in advance. It's just because he accelerated his own time, so it gave others an illusion that he had an extra reagent in his hand. Then the quantum suit. Just when Tony in the future was about to say that he would make him a set, he saw Arno's eyes on the nano storage core on his chest. "Okay, I understand." He took the nano core consciously and handed it over. "Not bad, very sensible, worthy of being a good brother. Don't worry, you will never regret your decision today." Arno patted Tony's shoulder with satisfaction. "As a brother, although they are not in the same universe. But it's okay to save a brother in another universe who would have died in fate. It's just a matter of convenience." His other purpose was that he wanted to see the strength of Thanos, the strongest boss in Marvel's previous stage, the cosmic tyrant. Thanos in the Avengers 4 final battle was the last Marvel movie he had watched. He traveled through time after this movie, and he didn't know if there would be any exciting episodes or defenses in Marvel later. Although Thanos' performance in the movie didn't seem to be very good. But this is a real world, and he is not sure whether Thanos' strength will be enhanced. If it is the heart of the universe Thanos in the comics, it will be difficult to deal with. So it is necessary to go to Tony's universe in the future to try Thanos' weight. It is definitely not because he is too bored. While he was thinking, the nano core wrapped in green light in his palm was directly divided into 3 this time. He put the future Tony returned the nanocore to him and handed one to his brother. Tony frowned at the nanocore handed to him and said, I don't need it. I can make it myself in the future. I can't make it now. I didn't ask you to make it according to this. It's just a toy. Play with it. It's quite convenient in an emergency. It can be used for emergency. Tony thought about it and felt that it made sense. He took the nanocore made by Arno. By the way, remember to ask Wade to interrogate the whereabouts of the superstar Thanos when you return to the manor. I will get rid of Thanos when I come back. Tony nodded helplessly. I understand. I know I can't stop you, but you have to be careful when you go to another universe. Get rid of Thanos when you come back. Do you listen to others? In the future, Tony hesitated again after hearing this. He felt that this would destroy the timeline too much. Did Thanos go offline so early in this universe? However, seeing that the guardian of the time stone in this universe, Ancient One, did not speak, he did not speak either. This universe is completely different from his own universe. Maybe the Thanos in this universe will be a short-lived ghost. Arno finally said to Ancient One, please take care of my Earth while I am away, although I may only be away for a moment. Ancient One smiled mysteriously and replied, of course, no problem, but it may be more than a moment. I wish you a happy journey in the new world. As she said that, she snapped her fingers, and Banner's transparent soul flew from the New York temple in the unclosed portal and attached to Hulk. Dr. Hulk, wake up. Okay, let's go, let me see what kind of surprises the new universe will give me. Arno pressed the nano core, and the iron battle suit that perfectly fit him covered his whole body. Captain America, who had been playing for a few chapters, quietly moved to the side of Tony in the future. Tony, your brother seems to be more domineering than you when he wears your iron armor. Shut up. Tony in the future pressed Steve's shuttle bracelet, and the suit instantly covered Steve, and he was instantly teleported back to his original universe. Then, he took Ant-Man Scott out of the wine glass and threw it directly on the ground. Don't pretend to sleep, your suit is not waterproof, everything is settled, let's go. Ant-Man instantly returned to his original size and laughed awkwardly twice. He really wasn't pretending. After being put into the cup, he knew at the moment Arno stared at him. If he didn't do it at that time, he would really be crushed to death like an ant and become a real Ant-Man. He looked at Arno timidly, and also pressed the shuttle bracelet and disappeared. Tony in the future looked at Banner, whose soul had just returned to the body and was still a little confused. He was too lazy to explain and directly pressed the start button to teleport Banner back. He finally looked at Arno. You should have set the coordinates, right? Of course. Okay, let's go. After that, the two disappeared together. Earth, 1999 Branch Line Universe. 9 figures appeared out of thin air on the quantum teleporter. Thor put down Mjolnir in his hand and took the lead in putting away his shuttle suit. It's so boring, this thing is not as comfortable as my own battle suit. Rod opened the armor mask and said leisurely, is it possible that you are too fat and the shuttle suit is almost broken by the cheese on your stomach? Thor didn't have time to refute. Boom. Suddenly there was a muffled sound, which scared everyone. Looking closely, it was Hawkeye who knelt heavily on the quantum time traveler. Tony realized that something was wrong. There were 9 people when he went, and there were also 9 people when he came back. But his team had one more person back. Arno also put away the nano suit and put the nano core into the space he opened up. Then, before others could react to who he was, a thermal line of sight directly cut off Nebula's legs. He lifted Nebula, his scarlet eyes met her dark eyes, and smiled grimly. Come, call your father out. The other 8 people were all questioning. Rod was the first to react, and a machine gun popped out of his shoulder and pointed at Arno. No matter who you are, let her go immediately. This time he teamed up with Nebula to get the power gem together. In the process, one of them was a modified cyborg, and the other was an ordinary person who needed to rely on machinery to walk. The two of them couldn't help but resonate with each other's past, so he was also the one with the biggest reaction among the 8. Next was Rocket, who had been with Nebula the longest. He took out a rocket launcher from nowhere and pointed it at Arno. Hey, tough guy, let her go for me. Thor didn't have so much nonsense, seeing that Arno had no intention of letting go. Without saying anything, he rushed over directly. He grabbed Arno's arm with both hands and tried to pry open his hand holding Nebula. But no matter how hard he tried, the hand didn't move at all. He felt that pulling this man's hand away was even harder than the time when he pulled the Crucible Star ring with his bare hands in Nidavi. Ah! Thor roared, blue-white lightning flashed in his eyes, and lightning began to shine on his body. He was going to exert his strength. The power of thunder burst out, Thor's strength increased greatly, and he also had magic attacks. Yes, it's indeed much stronger than when you were the god of hammer. Feeling the slight numbness from the arm that Thor grabbed, Arno gave a thumbs up to the fat boy in front of him. But his brain didn't seem to grow with his strength. Is he sure he wants to save people from his hands, not kill them? After Thor's thunder and lightning, he was fine, but the nebula in his hand was smoking. If he continued to shock for a while, the CPU of the nebula would be burnt. This won't work, she is still useful. Arno threw the nebula on the ground and ended her electrotherapy journey. Thor, look at this. The moment Thor raised his fat, bearded face. The punch that Arno was about to hit him on the face changed direction, and he sent him flying with a liver-blasting punch. It was a close call, his hand almost touched something dirty. He was afraid that if he punched Thor in the face, Thor's greasy fat face would burst and get all over his hand. Ah, it's so disgusting. Stop, 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 stop it. There must be some misunderstanding. Tony saw Thor being beaten and the others were ready to rush forward, so he quickly stopped them in the middle and shouted loudly. This guy is a ruthless man who can pick up the Infinity Stones with his bare hands without changing his expression. You know, even Thanos feels uncomfortable holding the Infinity Stones with his bare hands, so the body of his cheap brother is probably beyond their understanding. Now even the strongest Thor among them is not his opponent, so if the others come up, wouldn't that just be a waste? Tony still had some credibility, and the other Avengers stopped him. Tony breathed a sigh of relief, as long as his teammates didn't send him off. He turned to look at Arno. Arno, is there any misunderstanding? The Nebula in our universe has turned over a new leaf, and she is no longer the adopted daughter of Thanos' killer. He subconsciously thought that Arno attacked Nebula because she was once Thanos' adopted daughter. I know, but... Arno bent down and lifted Nebula's smoking head up, facing everyone. She is the former Nebula, not the Nebula you have turned over a new leaf. Ah, everyone was stunned and even more confused. Only Tony reacted with an ugly face, and said gloomily. This is not the Nebula of our timeline, but the Nebula of the timeline where Rod went to get the power gem. She was replaced. Tony was not in a good mood. It was Nebula who saved his life, otherwise she might not have survived until Carol arrived. And now Nebula has been replaced, which means that the real Nebula has fallen into the hands of Thanos in that universe, and her life and death are uncertain. Arno did not explain why he knew this. Instead, he looked at the Infinity Stones on them. A blue light flashed in his hand, and the other 3 Infinity Stones on the people appeared in his hand. Crushed the Cosmic Spirit Orb casually. Dark red Reality Gem, purple Power Gem, orange Soul Gem. The 6 stones were collected, but Arno held the 3 stones in his right hand, but frowned. Casually threw the nebula in his left hand to the ground and stepped on it. 3 colors of light appeared on his left hand, and the 3 stones of space, time, and mind in his body appeared in his left hand. Looking at the 3 stones on his left hand that were obviously brighter than those on his right hand, Arno was a little confused. What does this mean? Not only was the surface brighter, he could feel that the power of the 3 stones in his body was purer than the other 3. Was it because the 3 stones merged with him, or was it because of the difference in the universe? Or was it because the mysterious figure who merged the stones into his soul strengthened the power of the 3 stones in his body? Arno played with the 3 stones in one hand, like a walnut, thinking. The Avengers, who had panicked when they saw the stones they had worked so hard to get disappear, shut up when they saw Arno holding 6 Infinity Stones in his bare hands. Even Thor, who had just flown back with the Stormbreaker ready for revenge, put down the axe from the bottom of his heart when he saw Arno holding 3 Infinity Stones in one hand. Only Tony realized what he was going to do, and hurriedly said, "Don't be impulsive, each Infinity Stone contains infinite power, it is difficult to use without a container, let alone use 6 at a time." Oh, Arno nodded, and then held the 6 Infinity Stones together. Instantly, a 6-color energy like an electric current crawled all over Arno's arm. feeling the tearing energy storm coming from the palm of his hand. Arno knew why it was said that 6 Infinity Stones could not be used without a container. This energy storm, let alone ordinary people, Hulk would die on the spot without a container. But he is Superman, he can do whatever he wants. If he doesn't want to use a container, then don't use it. Arno grinned, and his mind moved. Shua. The dazzling 6-color energy suddenly burst out from between Arno's fingers, instantly shaking several people around him away. When the light faded, Arno breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of his burnt palms and half of the energy in his body. Let's find a container next time. Okay, Tony's share is done, it's your turn. After putting away the 6 raw stones, he looked at Nebula, who was struggling under his feet. Now, carry out your mission, and teleport your father over. After that, he kicked Nebula to the quantum shuttle console. You will regret it, my father's strength is beyond your imagination. Seeing this, Nebula didn't pretend anymore, and climbed onto the console with both hands with all her strength. Although this man can use 6 infinite gems with his bare hands, she admits that he is very strong, but she believes that her father will be stronger. When my father comes, he will avenge me and beat the shit out of him. The others were swept by the power of the raw stones and were powerless to stop it. With a vicious look in his eyes, Nebula began to quickly input the coordinates and started the quantum shuttle again. I could only watch Nebula open the quantum shuttle. The next moment, boom, a spaceship soared from the quantum shuttle and crashed through the roof, and quickly enlarged in the air. When it completely rushed into the sky, it had become a huge battleship that covered the sky and the sun. Thanos' Temple 2 battleship made a domineering appearance. Too high. A cold voice came out. Arno looked up at the huge battleship, and his eyes lit up red. The red heat vision soared into the sky. As Arno turned his head, it was like a sharp blade cutting through a cake. The Temple 2 that covered the sky and the sun was instantly cut in half by the heat vision. Boom boom boom. The Temple 2 was domineering for only 10 seconds. Before it could launch a round of saturation bombing on the Avengers base, it was cut in 2 and exploded. Carrying flames, 2 huge pieces of spaceship wreckage fell towards the entire Avengers base. Chapter 71. If these 2 pieces of the big guy fall down, not only will the entire base be crushed into biscuits, but most of the Avengers present will not survive. There are still a few mortals among them. But fortunately, our Mr. Superman is handsome and kind, and he did not let the wreckage of the battleship fall. Arno instantly appeared in the air and kicked the 2 pieces of the wreckage of the battleship. Bang, bang. With 2 loud noises, Arno, who seemed as small as an ant in front of the wreckage of the spaceship, kicked the 2 pieces of the wreckage of the battleship out like kicking a football and landed on the open space in the distance. Arno in the air slowly flew towards the wreckage of the spaceship with his hands behind his back. Thanos, do you still need me to invite you out? It would be ridiculous for the dignified overlord of the universe to die in the explosion of his own spaceship. Boom. Sure enough, there was another loud bang, and a big hole suddenly appeared in the wreckage of the warship. A golden armored purple potato with a sense of oppression walked out of the hole. Behind him were the 4 obsidian generals. These were also the only few men who survived the explosion in his half of the warship. Arno looked up and down at Thanos, like looking at a monkey in a zoo. You are called Thanos. Thanos could not hide the anger in his eyes, holding the tyrant's double blades and pointing at Arno and questioning. Who are you and why are you attacking my spaceship? Arno looked through Thanos' purple skin and observed his bones and muscles. Looking at Thanos, whose physical fitness was exaggerated but not at all what he imagined, he shook his head with some disappointment. It doesn't matter who I am, but since you attacked my Earth, I am the Terminator of your past and future. Thanos was confused. Attack your Earth? I have never seen you. There is no such person as you on Earth. As a collector of Infinity Stones, he certainly knew everything about the Earth where 3 Infinity Stones exist at the same time. Except for that woman who is covered in debt, there is no such powerful person on Earth. His own Temple 2 was shattered by this guy in one blow, just like cutting a piece of white paper. How could such a strong guy come from the original Earth? This guy is deliberately looking for trouble. Arno chuckled. Hee hee, just because there is no such person in this universe does not mean that there is no such person in other universes. Thanos' pupils shrank sharply when he heard this, and he realized that this guy was also from a parallel universe in the past. It was this guy's universe self who provoked him, so he would come to attack his self in another universe across the universe. What the hell is this? What I do in other universes is none of my business. But now that things have come to this, since the other party has come, they will definitely not give up. So, there is only one choice. Kill him. Do it. With Thanos' loud shout, Ebony Maw, who had secretly controlled the debris of the spacecraft around him, immediately crushed countless metal fragments into twisted spikes and shot them at Arno in the air. However, facing the spiral spikes that shot like raindrops, Arno did not dodge. Let countless spikes shoot at him, even on his eyeballs. With the sound of ding-dong-dong on Arno's body, countless spikes were squeezed into discus and fell powerlessly. Ebony Maw looked at this scene in amazement. This defense is probably as good as my father's. Whoosh! An axe with a chain flew over and wrapped around Arno's legs. The black dwarf below was delighted, and he tried to pull Arno down into the air with his arms. Crack! The chain was broken straight, but the figure in the sky did not move at all. Roar! Black dwarf roared, and exerted force with his arms, and a huge force that was not inferior to the normal Hulk came. Arno looked at the black dwarf who was constantly trying to pull him down with indifference. This kind of force was as weak as an ant to him now. He broke the chain with a little force from his legs, and then he held the broken chain and pulled it hard. Black dwarf only felt an irresistible force coming, and then he was pulled into the air, watching a fist quickly enlarge in his sight. Bang! The next moment, Black dwarf's head exploded. Black dwarf, dead. Arno grabbed the headless shoulder of Black dwarf and threw his body towards Ebony Maw. Looking at Black dwarf who was like a black stream of light. Ebony Maw quickly used his telekinesis to stop Black dwarf's body, but the moment his telekinesis came into contact with Black dwarf, a huge force far exceeding his telekinesis limit came. Poof! He spat out a mouthful of old blood, and his telekinesis was forced to dissipate. The body of the black dwarf also lost its resistance, and instantly smashed him into a pulp. Ebony Maw, dead. Without time to grieve over the death of his two adopted sons, Thanos took advantage of this gap with General Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight to attack Arno together. The three of them cooperated tacitly, jumping up together, one on the left, one on the right, and one in front. On the left and right, General Corvus Glaive's Peerless Blade and Proxima Midnight's spear stabbed Arno's heart and temple respectively. In front, Thanos raised the Tyrant's double blades and charged to slash at Arno's head. All three sides were killing moves, no matter which attack was blocked, the other two would give it a fatal blow. Ha! Naive! Arno sneered. While dodging Thanos's charged downward slash, his hands attacked with weapons faster than General Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, strangling their necks at a faster speed. Then he swung Proxima Midnight and hit Thanos who was splitting the air. Boom! Crack! Boom! With a loud bang, Thanos was hit to the ground, splashing dirt and rocks. Corvus Glaive, who was caught in the other hand, looked at Proxima Midnight with a grudge, who was dying because Arno used her as a weapon to hit Thanos and had her bones broken. Proxima Midnight. But before he could continue his impotent rage, he felt his vision blurred. Then he collided with a big purple face. Boom! 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 X2. Arno grabbed Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight and hit Thanos left and right. But they were not very strong. After only 3 hits, each of them was shattered into slag on Thanos. Ah! Thanos roared, and with red eyes, he shook the broken flesh on his body towards Arno. At the moment when Arno's vision was blocked by flesh and blood, Thanos held the Tyrant's double blade with both hands, and slashed Arno with a very fast speed, one knife after another. Bang! 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 4 consecutive slashes, the Tyrant's double blade that could even break vibranium failed to cause a single wound to Arno. Even his destruction suit was brand new, without a trace of dust. Whether it was flesh and blood or attacks, they were blocked by his biological force field. You are too weak. Arno looked at the broken Tyrant's double blade that had chopped on his shoulder with disappointment, and blew a breath. Ha! White frost instantly covered the blade of the Tyrant's double blade, and Thanos had to let go. Arno snapped his fingers, and the Tyrant's double blades, which had turned into ice blades, shattered and turned into fragments all over the ground. Thanos panted heavily, staring at Arno blankly, and an unprecedented sense of powerlessness rose in his heart. What kind of monster is this? No, no, destiny shouldn't be like this, destiny should be mine. Thanos' eyes became fierce again, and the aura of the king rose again. Who are you? You shouldn't exist in any timeline. Who am I? Arno chuckled inexplicably, and 6 infinity stones appeared, hovering in his palm. 6 stones. Thanos' pupils shrank suddenly. The most important things in his plan appeared in front of him, making him subconsciously reach out to grab the stones. But not everyone's stones can be easily taken by him with absolute strength. He forgot that this time he was the one being crushed. A red light directly cut off Thanos' hands. Didn't I say that I am the Terminator of your past and future? Arno's eyes shone with red light, and he grabbed Thanos' neck and slowly lifted him into the air. The intense pain from the broken arms made Thanos regain his sanity from the 6 stones, and he finally remembered the reality that he was crushed by Arno. But he was unwilling, his long-cherished wish was not yet fulfilled. How could he die like this? But what could he do if he was unwilling? His arms were cut off and he could not resist at all, and the hand on his neck was getting tighter and tighter, and he couldn't even breathe. His big purple face was suffocated to purple and black. He could only stare at Arno, and struggled to ask the last question from his constantly squeezed throat. Who are you? Arno looked into Thanos' eyes, a trace of green light flashed in his red pupils, and he smiled grimly. I am a god, a real god, and this time you will not have a chance to revive again. As Arno's fingers exerted force, Thanos vaguely saw the shadow of another person behind Arno. He widened his eyes. That was, crack. Arno mercilessly broke Thanos' neck and threw him on the ground like garbage. Thanos, the overlord of a generation, fell. Fat Thor, who came out of the Avengers base in the distance, looked at this scene and tears flowed unconsciously. Loki, did you see that? Not only did I cut off Thanos' head for you once. Thanos also had his neck broken once in the same way he did to you. In total, he died once more than you did. If you knew, you would be very happy. Thor smiled brightly, but tears could not stop flowing down. But what's the use? You still can't come back. Father, mother, Heimdall, can't come back, I have nothing. Thor burst into tears. At the moment when Thanos' neck was broken, he could no longer hold back and cried like a 300-pound child. The other people next to Thor wanted to comfort Thor, but they couldn't say it. Just like Thor said, his parents, younger brother, and best brother are all dead, and even his hometown Asgard was destroyed. He has nothing left. It can be said that Thor is the one who grows the fastest and becomes the strongest among them, but he is also the most miserable one. What can they say? Let him cry, he will feel better after crying. Brother. In the endless green space, Loki on the golden throne wanted to get up and reach out to touch the crying Thor in the picture. But countless timelines entangled his whole body, making it difficult for him to move, and even the small action of reaching out his hand was extremely difficult. Loki just left the throne slightly, and countless timelines pressed his body back, causing him to hold the timelines on his body tightly. A tear fell from the corner of his eye, and he murmured as he looked at Thor in the picture as before. This time, everything will be fine, it will be fine, brother, I promise. This time, I will write the story. With the death of Thanos, Arno felt an extremely sublimated feeling from the depths of his soul. The spiritual power, which was originally a little behind the physical strength, was completely equal to the physical strength. The next moment, the body and the spirit began to merge together like water and milk. The fusion of spirit and body made Arno feel that every cell in his body was cheering and jumping for joy, and this comfort made him close his eyes intoxicated. At the same time, the joy of the cells made the bright yellow sunlight on the surface of his body shine through. This dazzling light could not even be blocked by the destruction suit on his body, and the silver-gray destruction suit was illuminated into golden yellow. When the power of spirit and body was completely integrated, the sunlight on his body began to converge. Arno opened his eyes again. The black pupils turned into a white gold color like the sun. Arno exhaled lightly. The front suddenly changed like a natural disaster. An extremely terrifying hurricane plowed out a hellish abyss with overwhelming power and continued to spread forward. At this speed, it will take only a few seconds for the hurricane to reach the city and destroy the entire city. Although this is not his Earth, Arno is not a person who kills innocent people indiscriminately. A blue light flashed, and he appeared in front of the hurricane. This time he did not use super speed, but space transfer. He stood in front of the hurricane without any movement. The hurricane that could easily destroy a city was directly consumed by the invisible biological force field the moment it touched him. A call is a disaster, and a thought is also salvation. This little thing did not affect Arno's mood. He clenched his fist with satisfaction. Obviously, the physical body has not been strengthened much, but with the balance of mental strength, he feels that he is now terribly strong. This is a more complex evolution of life. Compared to when he was the god of the world before, he is now more worthy of the title of God. The omnipotent God. He had a feeling that even if Thanos was given 6 Infinity Stones, he might not be able to take him away with his snap of fingers. Do you want to experiment? Arno said to himself with some curiosity, and grabbed the peerless blade that attacked from behind. Looking at the twisted but not completely dead General Corvus Glaive, he was not surprised at all. Want to avenge your father and wife? Arno looked at General Corvus Glaive with a smile on his face. 6 stones appeared in his hand and were thrown directly in front of General Corvus Glaive. Come on, pick them up and try to destroy me with them. General Corvus Glaive looked at Arno in disbelief. He had never heard such a request for death in his life. But the extreme hatred made him not care so much. He let go of the peerless blade and reached out to take the stones on the ground. A red light unexpectedly passed through the body of General Corvus Glaive. You really want to take it? Arno looked at General Corvus Glaive, who was cut into 2 pieces on the ground, teasingly, and waved his hand to make the 6 Infinity Stones disappear. Although he wanted to try it, it was just a thought. He was not stupid enough to let others take 6 Infinity Stones to see if they could wipe him out. Seeing General Corvus Glaive, whose resentment was about to turn into substance, Arno stopped teasing him and crushed the peerless blade in his hand. As the peerless blade was destroyed, General Corvus Glaive's face instantly turned pale, and then turned into ash and dissipated. Arno looked at General Corvus Glaive, who turned into ash, indifferently, and said leisurely. It's good that the weapon is not destroyed and you are not dead, but it's most reliable to control your own destiny. General Corvus Glaive deposited his soul in the weapon, making him almost immortal. But at the same time, there is also a huge disadvantage, that is, if the weapon is destroyed, he will die. As for Arno himself, he felt that it was stupid to store his soul in an object. Although he was not dead, he had left himself with a fatal handle. With the death of the last general of Thanos' army, the sweeper came late. ZZ. One by one, the portals emitting sparks rotated and opened. Wider than me. Wider than me. The voice came before the people arrived. A group of black men shouting, wider than me, lined up and walked out of the portal with spears. Then, many figures walked out of the portals one by one. From the Kamar Taj Wizard, the Wakanda Army, the Asgardian warriors, the Nova Corps, the Predators and other coalition forces. From individuals or small teams of heroes to their shining debuts, such as Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, Scarlet Witch, Wasp, Valkyrie, Guardians of the Galaxy, Howard the Duck, etc. But without exception, they all looked confused after coming out. Didn't the Mustache Wizard say that there was a tough battle to fight? What's going on with the wreckage of the battleship and the corpse of Thanos all over the ground? Could it be that the enemy in this tough battle is not Thanos, but someone else? With full of doubts, everyone looked at Arno, the only one standing in the field. Could it be that the enemy the wizard was talking about was him? Feeling the gazes of many people, Arno tilted his head slightly and looked at everyone. Danger. We'll die. With Arno's eyes, everyone had a voice in their hearts. Especially Spider-Man, he felt that his spider warning was about to explode. As Arno watched, the atmosphere in the field became more serious, as if a fight would start if there was a disagreement. Is it going to be a Superman vs. Avengers Earth Alliance? Of course, impossible. Tony fell from the sky wearing Mk-85 and landed in front of the Alliance army. Boys, calm down, he's one of us, the problem has been solved. Tony's words relaxed the tense atmosphere at the scene, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief, feeling as if they had saved their lives. He then looked at Strange, who was in the lead. Hey, the trickster, the only time you said you won, was this time. Although it was a question, he was affirmative. After all, half of the lost people were successfully brought back, and Thanos had been solved, so they undoubtedly won. It has to be said that this wizard is really good, and even a proud man like him is somewhat impressed. It was actually calculated that this time they traveled back and not only brought back the original stone, but also brought back his brother, allowing them to win all the way. Strange opened his mouth and looked at Tony, speechless. It was a hammer. Who is he? I don't even know him. He saw more than 14 million futures, but there was no trace of this person at all. Tony didn't notice Strange's strange look. He turned around a little nervously and looked at Arno. Why did he have a natural fear of Arno? It was as if he was really his brother. Tony took a few deep breaths and said solemnly, Arno, thank you very much for everything you have done. He didn't ask Arno why he knew that Nebula was replaced and Thanos would come. Because it didn't matter. If Arno hadn't insisted on coming, they wouldn't have found out that Nebula was replaced. If Thanos was suddenly teleported back by the fake Nebula and attacked, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. He himself might even die, so he didn't ask why, but just expressed his heartfelt thanks to Arno. As a brother, even if you are not Tony in my universe, if I meet you, you are my brother, and I will not watch you die. Arno patted Tony on the shoulder and joked. But you don't seem to be willing to do so. You don't even want to call me brother. Tony's face was twisted when he heard this, but he still said the name that he admitted in his heart but was unwilling to say. Brother, thank you. Arno looked at Tony in surprise. He was just joking, but he didn't expect that Tony in this universe could really call him brother. After Tony said the most shameful words, he just let it go. Anyway, there is nothing big going on in your universe now. Do you want to come and see your niece in another universe? I believe she will be very happy if she knows that she has a Superman uncle. Niece, that's fine, Arno agreed without hesitation. His first junior in his past and present lives. He really wanted to see him. Okay, the other half of your planet's population is back, you should be busy too. I'll go see my niece by myself, you go and do your work. After saying this, Arno floated up into the air, but then as if remembering something, he pointed at Doctor Strange and said with a sly smile. Oh, right, you'd better find a chance to beat up Steven. The only chance he said is not for me, but for you. You can ask him for details. I believe he will give you a surprise. After that, Arno didn't wait for Tony to understand it completely. He took a last look at Wanda in the coalition, flew up into the sky, and left first. He didn't plan to have too much communication with Wanda in this universe. She was Wanda, but not his Wanda. As for other people, he didn't have the leisure to communicate. 1 year later, two figures, one big and one small, chased each other from the high-altitude clouds and fell freely in front of a small wooden house. The first to land was the tall figure of Arno. The little Morgan spurted out scorching flames from his hands, burning the grass where he landed until it was charred black before landing a little crookedly. Morgan Stark, the daughter of Tony and Pepper in this universe. She is also his niece, although not strictly speaking his biological daughter. But Tony in the parallel universe is also his brother in his eyes. Then his daughter is his biological niece. No problem. A year ago, Arno, who originally planned to stay for only 2 days to see his niece in this universe and leave, was controlled by the cute little Morgan for a whole year. Every time Arno saw Morgan's big eyes full of tears of reluctance calling him uncle, his heart softened. And he had planned to take time to study the power of several other Infinity Stones, so he did not leave immediately. Anyway, it's research no matter where you study, why not spend more time with his cute little niece? He even took the time to improve the Extremis potion again, and used the mind gem to add power to Morgan. Let Morgan have all the abilities of the Extremis virus, but there will be no lava-like traces when using the ability. And because the mind gem also comes with other functions that some desperate potions don't have, such as flight, mental enhancement, magic resistance, etc. Uncle, you won't let me go again. Morgan hugged Zoo Arno's thigh and acted like a spoiled child. Arno picked up little Morgan and let her sit on his arm, and scratched her nose lovingly. Uncle has let little Morgan go. In a 3-minute game, I let little Morgan go for 2 minutes and 59 seconds. Little Pepper came out of the cabin and smiled when she saw this warm scene. Little Morgan, come and have dinner with your uncle. Your uncle has been playing with you all day. Come on, Mommy. When Arno carried little Morgan into the house, Tony and Little Pepper were already sitting opposite each other at the dining table. And Arno naturally held little Morgan and sat in the main seat. This time, the few people did not chat from time to time as usual, but ate silently. Even little Morgan was eating quietly. Except for the sound of eating, the table was very quiet. After dinner, Tony was the first to break the silence and looked at Arno. Brother, are you leaving? Little Pepper and little Morgan also looked at him at the same time. Well, I've been here for so long, it's time to go back. Arno nodded first, and when the three of them showed a sad look, he changed the subject. But you don't have to be sad. I have memorized the spatial coordinates of this universe. I can come here anytime I want. The expressions of the three people instantly changed from negative to positive, and little Morgan jumped up happily. Then Uncle, you must remember to come to see Morgan often. Little Morgan loves you 10,000 times. Arno smiled and touched little Morgan's head lovingly. No problem, Uncle will bring you a gift next time I come to see you. Little Morgan cheered after hearing this. Great. Tony also smiled and said, since you can come anytime, I won't let you stay overnight. Don't forget that you have a home in this universe. Of course, even if you are not here, I will come to see you often because of my lovely niece. Arno joked, waved his hand to open a blue portal, waved to the three people and walked in. This is a new function of the space stone he discovered this year, which is to open the space channel of other universes. DC Universe, Earth, Metropolis. Arno stepped out of the blue portal and appeared above the slightly dark city. Feeling the space atmosphere around him that was completely different from his own universe, he was silent. What the hell is this? Is this still Earth? Arno's supervision was activated, and his dark pupils turned platinum. Suddenly, everything in this world became visible to his eyes. Whether it was matter itself, the so-called impenetrable lead, or the mysterious magic barrier, none of them could block his current supervision. This was also the change caused by the complete fusion of his mental power and body. His eyes could not only observe everything in matter, but also everything else that was not natural matter. Now that Thor's hammer was placed in front of him, he could see clearly the leaks that the Dwarf King accidentally left in the hammer when he made the hammer. In fact, according to his current situation, he was no longer an ordinary Kryptonian. Instead, he was heading towards a higher dimensional life form. He had a hunch that if he continued to evolve like this, his eyes would see more than just this universe itself. Maybe he could directly observe another world. But at the moment, he had not evolved to that level, but there was nothing in this world that could be hidden in his eyes. His eyes swept across the planet. Metropolis, Gotham City, Paradise Island, Atlantis, Mother Box. Oh. This is the so-called anti-life equation. The platinum light in Arno's eyes became brighter and brighter, and the anti-life equation engraved deep underground became clearer and clearer. Interesting, the ultimate weapon that can control all free thoughts. Although he didn't know much about this thing, he knew it was a very dangerous existence. He would see if he could take it away when he left this universe. After all, since he was here, it was a handy thing. But now, he had something more interesting. His eyes finally looked in the direction of Kansas. There was a person who was extremely dazzling in this dark world. Superman. Or Clark Kent. Looking at the young and immature Clark, it was obvious that he had not yet become the god of the world in the future. And at this moment, our young Superman was experiencing the most confused moment of his life. A tornado that changed his destiny. Arno's mouth curled up with an interested smile. Things are getting interesting. He actually came to the world of the DC universe, which in a sense belongs to his real universe. Although he went back to the wrong home, Arno was not panicked. He made the best of it. Especially since the space gems in his body did not become ineffective, he was not panicked at all. He could feel that he could still connect his universe in the Marvel Universe and the Branch Line 1999 universe he had visited. Even if he encountered an unbeatable existence, he could at least escape back to the Marvel Universe. In fact, not only space, but also the two gems of time and mind in his body can be used normally. As for the other three garbage things, After studying the 3 gems of power, soul, and reality, he returned them to Tony and sent them back to the universe they should belong to. Because after his attempts, the other 3 garbage gems brought back by the Avengers from various timelines, he could not integrate them into his body together with the 3 gems in his body, and thus become a part of himself. Maybe it was because they were not from the same universe, the 3 stones in his body still rejected the other 3 stones. Although he could use them, he could not obtain their abilities. Then what was the use of these 3 pieces of garbage, so he simply returned them to Tony and asked him to send them back to where they belonged. He planned to return to his own universe and put the other 3 stones that belonged to him back into his pocket. Well, his Earth, and then his universe, so it was reasonable that the infinite stones in the universe were also his, right? In the Ganges, a highway in Kansas, Clark was filled with anxiety. Because his adoptive father, Jonathan Kent, was facing a life and death crisis at the moment. A violent tornado was sweeping up countless vehicles all the way to his adoptive father. But his father's foot was sprained by a car that fell from the sky because he was saving his dog, so he could not escape. He wanted to save his adoptive father, and as long as he wanted, he would definitely save his adoptive father. But Jonathan reached out his hand to stop him, shook his head, and pointed out to him that there were many civilians under the bridge. He understood what his adoptive father meant. In the past, his adoptive father often told him that humans were not ready to accept his existence. Therefore, he had to hide his ability, otherwise it would cause panic among ordinary people. So he couldn't take action and expose his specialness. He shed tears with pain on his face, and could only watch the tornado continue to move. He kept approaching his adoptive father. Your father stretched out his hand and asked you to save him within 5 seconds. Didn't you understand? A voice sounded in Clark's ears. He suddenly found that a man who was a few points taller and stronger than him was putting his arm on his shoulder. The most important thing is that with his sensory ability, he didn't even notice when the other party put his arm on him. Arno ignored Clark's shock. In his opinion, Clark was still too immature and could not inspire his fighting spirit at all. He wanted to do something else. Do you want to save your adoptive father? Clark seemed to see hope when he heard this. He turned around and grabbed Arno's shoulder tightly, and said anxiously, "Can you save him? Please save him." He didn't realize that the force he was using now was enough to crush an ordinary person. But Arno didn't care about this strength at all. He showed a meaningful smile and said slowly, "Be my godson, your adoptive father won't die, are you willing?" Clark was stunned for a moment when he heard this, but saw that his adoptive father was about to be swallowed by the tornado. He didn't have time to think about it, and immediately agreed. "I am willing, as long as you can save my adoptive father, anything is fine." "Good boy." Arno patted Clark's hairy head. He took a step forward, and appeared in front of Jonathan the next second. Jonathan had been watching Clark, so he also noticed Arno, who appeared next to Clark out of thin air. After the two said something, the man disappeared again. The next second, he appeared in front of him out of thin air again. Just when Jonathan was about to ask who the other person was, he felt his vision blurred. When the picture became clear again, he and the man next to him were already under the bridge. Martha hurried forward to support Jonathan, crying with joy and hugging him. Arno ignored the two people showing off their affection and patted Clark on the shoulder. "Follow me." Clark looked at his adoptive parents hesitantly, and then he realized that there were only his adoptive parents. All the other people under the overpass had a faint yellow light in their eyes and stood there motionless. No wonder they were not surprised at all when this mysterious man disappeared in an instant and was discovered by his adoptive father. "He has lost consciousness." Clark was kind-hearted. He looked at the dazed people with concern and turned to Arno to ask, "Will they be okay?" "Don't worry, they are fine, they are just dreaming." Arno waved his hand. He just used his mind power to control their thoughts and let them fall into the dream they most desired. In a sense, this is still a reward for them. "Let's go, follow me." After Arno finished speaking, he walked forward. Jonathan also nodded to Clark, motioning him to follow. He could feel that this mysterious man had no ill will towards Clark, but rather a sense of teaching. As an ordinary person, he could only teach Clark the correct and kind ideological education. But the ability was not something that he, an ordinary person, could teach, so he could only let Clark restrain his power. Now there is a person who also possesses special powers to teach Clark his power, which is undoubtedly a bad thing. Arno took Clark against the wind and approached the tornado. Although Clark's power was already very strong at this time, he had been hiding his ability. It was the first time for him to get so close to such a terrifying natural disaster, and he couldn't help but feel a little scared. Arno looked comfortable, opened his arms, and embraced the breeze. How is it? It's spectacular, right? It's the power of nature. Clark looked at Arno, who was almost walking into the tornado in front of him, and swallowed his saliva. It's really spectacular, but is it really okay for us to get so close? Arno smiled when he heard it, turned around, and pointed his finger at Clark's chest. Clark, this power from nature is undoubtedly terrifying. But your and my power exceeds nature, and we are more terrifying than the power of nature, understand? Exceed natural disasters. How is this possible? Clark looked incredulous, although he knew he was special and that he was very powerful. But because of his forbearance since childhood, he didn't know how strong his power was. No, your understanding of your own power is too shallow. Today I will teach you the first lesson. Arno grabbed Clark's shoulders, pushed him forward, pressed the back of his head, and made his face the violently rotating tornado. Now, use your power to break this tornado. Clark felt the strong wind that kept passing over his face, and his heart was pounding. He subconsciously wanted to turn his head to ask Arno, but because he was pressed on the back of his head, he couldn't turn around, so he could only shout loudly in the wind. Use my power to break it. How should I do it? There are too many methods, and the simplest ones are: use your power to break it, blow it out with air, use super speed to offset it in the opposite direction, and use the biological force field to extinguish it. Oh yes, your current use of the biological force field is too low level, and it is estimated that you can't do it, but you can still do the first three. Clark heard this, a little unconfident. I really can do it these. Behind him, Arno said slowly and expressionlessly in the voice of reading a script. Clark, show your confidence. Think about it, if I wasn't there just now, you would have lost your adoptive father. But if you can do the things I said, you can not only save your adoptive father. You can also save more innocent civilians under this tornado and become a superhero they admire. Don't you want to save your adoptive father and save more innocent people? After Arno finished speaking, his mouth twitched. God, he was really not suitable for such a righteous speech. But it was obvious that these words were very useful to Clark. I understand, Godfather, I want to save my adoptive father, I want to save more innocent people, I can do it. Clark was obviously excited. He raised his fist, and punched the tornado with force. Bang! He used so much force that a layer of white air waves appeared around his fist. But the tornado was only hit by his fist, and his power instantly penetrated the tornado and dissipated in the air. Tornado. What the hell went by so fast? This little injury was not painful to the huge tornado, and it was repaired in an instant. Clark, don't just use brute force, learn to control every bit of your power and spread the power from your fist. Arno said, stomping his foot lightly on the ground. The ground under their feet suddenly shattered like a pixel block and spread nearly a kilometer. But Clark was surprised by the perspective. It was discovered that Arno had used a force that could break the ground of nearly 1,000 meters. Only the surface of the ground was broken, and there was no damage underground. He had always thought that his control over power was good enough, but now it seems that in the eyes of true superhumans, he simply had no control at all. At this moment, the two had been swallowed by the tornado and were in the center of the tornado. The only two people who were awake under the bridge, Martha covered her mouth with a worried look. Jonathan was calmer and comforted Martha, but there was a trace of worry in his eyes. Even if their son was not an ordinary person, he couldn't help but worry about being swallowed by such a natural disaster. But he couldn't do anything at the moment, he could only believe in his son and that man. However, the two people in the violent tornado stood still, and the huge suction force in the tornado had no effect on them. Clark felt the terrifying tornado sweeping over his body, but it couldn't blow him away at all. After finding out that it was not as strong as he had imagined, his pounding heart began to calm down. Spread the power from your fist. Clark clenched his fists, closed his eyes and felt his own power. He imagined the scene where Arno crushed the ground without hurting the ground, and pondered the mystery. Super brain loading. Loading completed. Clark's eyes suddenly opened, his clenched fists relaxed, and he began to accumulate power. Spread it out for me. With a loud shout, his fist swung out slowly and quickly. Bang! With a long sonic boom, the white air wave spread out with his fist as the center point, instantly breaking up the tornado in front of him. A tornado suddenly became half a tornado. The power was lost, and the tornado naturally dissipated. I did it. Clark turned around and shouted to Arno excitedly, like a child waiting for praise. Yes, you learn quickly, but when doing things, you should not only consider the present but also the consequences. Arno pointed to the sky, his eyes lit up red. Clark was shocked. Is this the same thermal vision as his? Could he be one of my people? But before Clark could ask, the thermal vision in Arno's eyes, which was much thicker than his, gushed out into the sky. The vehicles in the sky that were blown up by the tornado and now scattered by Clark and fell like raindrops, all turned into nothingness in less than a second. Not even a drop of molten iron fell, it evaporated out of thin air. People in Kansas who own vehicles N. Clark stared at this scene in amazement. Are they really the same species? Can thermal vision be so thick? Okay, today's first lesson ends here. Tomorrow, for the second lesson, we will go to Gotham City. Arno's mouth curled up with a somewhat excited smile. He wants to create a different Superman, a Superman that will make the world's evil feel extremely terrified. Second lesson. Clark was a little confused. Of course, as your godfather, I have the obligation to teach you how to control your own power and how to use it correctly, right? Arno crossed his arms, smiled slightly, and his eyes were inexplicable. Without waiting, Clark asked again. Hey, are you okay? Jonathan ran over. Although he asked you, his eyes kept looking at Clark to see if he was injured. Clark looked at Jonathan and said excitedly, I'm fine, father. Thanks to the Godfather, he taught me how to control my power. I broke the tornado with one punch. Jonathan was shocked. Did you break the tornado? He thought that this mysterious man had used some means to dissipate the tornado. He didn't expect that it was his eldest son who did the miracle. Okay, Jonathan, everyone has been frightened enough today, don't ask any more questions. Martha walked up with the dog, first asked her husband not to ask any more questions, and then sincerely expressed her gratitude to Arno. Thank you, sir, for saving my husband. Without Jonathan, Clark and I don't know what to do. If possible, please come to our house and let us treat you well and thank you. Come on, Godfather, my mother's pancakes are delicious, stay here for a few days, I still have a lot to talk to you about. Clark also happily invited Arno, and the Godfather was already very smooth. Okay, it just so happens that I have a lot to teach you these days. Arno is not in a hurry to return to the Marvel Universe. He still has a lot of things here that he wants to pack and take away. He doesn't even plan to go back alone. Of course, this is all later. Jonathan's car has been rolled up to heaven, and was burned to ashes by Arno and went to hell. But he didn't plan to walk back with them, take them back by flying, or open a space gate to teleport back. Instead, he took out a Night 15 off-road vehicle directly from the space. This was the toy that Tony gave him in the 1999 Branch universe. There were still many in the space. Even more than cars, since Tony knew that he could open up space by himself. In the year of the 1999 universe, Tony stuffed a lot of daily necessities, even helicopters, yachts, etc. in his space. In his words, it was better to be prepared. He didn't want his brother to experience the suffering he had experienced before, although the probability was very small for Arno. Godfather, can you also make things out of thin air? Clark looked at the off-road vehicle that appeared out of thin air in shock. With his supervision, he was sure that this thing was not transported from somewhere else by the Godfather at super speed. It just appeared out of thin air. This is the power of space. If you work hard in the future, you may also have it. Arno said meaningfully. However, at that time, whether you still like a mere car, or whether there is anything else that you can see is hard to say. But now, Clark is still very interested in this car, circling around the tough and majestic Night 15. Stop looking, let's go, go drive, go to your house. Ah, do you want me to drive? Of course, this car is for you, just as a gift from the Godfather. This is not good, this car looks so expensive. Fortunately, it's only 15 million. Tony, asshole, that's the standard 15 million, mine is the top configuration, more than 20 million. Clark, finally, under the intimidation of Arno's eyes as the Godfather, Clark still accepted the car. But he also promised that he would never sell the car, and would only use it as a means of transportation, not for profit. But Arnold said he didn't care. It was just a small toy. It was his after he gave it to him. It was his business to deal with it. Even if Clark didn't drive it, but held it up for fun every day, it was his freedom. In this way, under the warm hospitality of the Kent family, Arnold's first day in the DC universe passed peacefully. Oh, by the way, the people under the overpass had been freed from his mind control after Arnold and his friends drove away. I just don't know how they would feel when they saw the empty road. Maybe continue to pay the car loan. The next day, Arnold did not take Clark to Gotham City immediately. Instead, he and Clark came to a vacant lot on his farm. Godfather, aren't we going to Gotham today? Or are we going there by car? Clark still couldn't forget the feeling of driving the Night 15 yesterday. After all, even if he is a Superman, he is also a man, and which man doesn't love cars? Arno shook his finger at him and corrected his thoughts. Car? No, Clark, cars are just a means of transportation when we're bored, but they are definitely not our main means of transportation. Ah, then let's run. Clark scratched his head. Although he was indeed much faster running than driving, he still preferred to drive. After all, running is not only easy to be discovered, but also looks stupid. No, let's fly. Godfather, you still have a plane. Before Clark finished speaking, he stared at Arno, whose feet slowly left the ground. Come back to your senses, observe carefully how I fly. Clark came back to his senses from the shock and carefully observed Arno's figure floating in the air. Godfather, you don't seem to be flying by your body, but more like an invisible thing is holding you up and floating. Arno nodded and explained slowly. Yes, this is the bio-force field, a special life substance that every Kryptonian possesses that can interact with surrounding objects or the Earth's magnetic field. In fact, you already know it, but you don't know how to use it, and can only release it passively. I believe you have also discovered that although you are very powerful, as long as you control it intentionally, you can lift or catch an object much larger than you without any damage, which is not scientific, but you can do it. This is the bio-force field, a force that cannot be explained by science. And it can do far more than just lifting and picking up heavy objects. It can also do many incredible things, such as flying. It is to form a mutual connection with the Earth's magnetic field to achieve flight. Clark kept digesting Arno's words in his mind, and tried to release his own bio-force field to link with the Earth's magnetic field and fly. As he tried, the gravel and sand around him began to tremble, and his body began to twist and turn slowly off the ground. Finally, he was parallel to Arno in the air. Well, not bad, you have a high level of understanding. Arno patted his shoulder with satisfaction. Then, Clark lost his balance and fell directly from the air. You still need to get familiar with the ability to fly, otherwise it will not be good to crash in the middle of the flight in the future. Arno said, waving his hand to open a deep blue space transmission channel. Because the entrance of the channel was surrounded by blue smoke-like energy, Clark could not see what was on the other side of the door. What is this? The North Pole, a good place for you to train with peace of mind. Arno said and stepped into the space channel. Clark also hurriedly followed in. As a result, the next second after stepping through the space channel, Clark stepped into the air. Clark fell directly from the clouds. Arno stood in the void, watching the scene silently. He was holding a bucket of popcorn in his hand. That's right, he opened the space channel to an altitude of 10,000 meters. Relax, Clark, have you forgotten? You can fly. Clark, who was falling from the sky, felt relieved after hearing Arno's voice. With his godfather around, he had nothing to fear. After all, in his opinion, his godfather was the most reliable person in the world. He adjusted his breathing, and the biofield was connected to the Earth's magnetic field again, and the speed of his body falling slowly decreased. Falling, stop. When Clark's body was less than 1 meter above the ground, he hovered steadily. He completely mastered flying. I did it, Godfather. He turned his head to look at Arno beside him, and almost couldn't catch his breath and fell to the ground again. Arno was lying in the air in a supine position, holding popcorn in his hand, eating it with an expression of watching a good show. Godfather, this is not fun at all. It's fun, and this is the fastest way to master flying, isn't it? Arno couldn't help but recall the first time he learned to ride a bicycle in his previous life. His irresponsible father said that he would hold his bicycle, but he pushed him down the slope and made him, quickly, learn how to ride a bicycle. Either fall or learn. I have to say that this method is immoral, but it is really fast. What if I don't master it? Then fall a few more times. Clark, okay, boy, stop complaining. Your godfather has been like this before. As for now. The popcorn in Arno's hand disappeared, and his body straightened up. Let's see who gets to Gotham City first. Clark also straightened up and smiled excitedly. That's what I meant. I won't let you just because you are my godfather. This is more exciting than his first off-road driving yesterday. Flying is the first ultimate dream of mankind. Then get ready. I'll count to 3. Ready, 3. Bang. Before the voice faded, Arno had already turned into a white wave and rushed out. Clark hurriedly chased after him, shouting, Godfather, you don't follow the rules. Arno's voice came from the far front. Your enemies won't tell you any rules, they will just do whatever it takes. 2 figures with air waves chased each other quickly in the air. Gotham City. It was just dusk. The sky of Gotham had already darkened, making people feel extremely depressed. 2 figures wearing capes and battle suits appeared over the dark Gotham. One was Arno wearing a silver-gray destruction suit. One was Clark wearing a red-blue nano suit. The nano suit was given to him by Arno, and was modified from Tony's Mk-85. Although the defense of Mk-85 was not enough for Superman, Superman did not need a suit to increase his defense. For them, the suit was more of a decoration. It was good-looking. Except for Arno's destruction suit. As for Superman's own suit, Arno planned to wait until Clark finished the second lesson today before letting him make his own choice. It was to become a god in the sun. Or the god of death who guards the sun. Arno took a deep breath of Gotham, which was more free than New York, and listened to the gunshots from time to time. It is indeed the Gotham City with simple folk customs. Arno smiled and pointed to the city under his feet. Clark, tell me, what do you see? Clark's supervision was turned on, and he quickly saw everything in Gotham from a high altitude. His heart sank to the bottom of the valley in an instant. Sin, full of sin, one side is normal, and the other side is hell. This sounds normal, right? Where there are people, there is evil. But when this evil reaches 50% of the whole city, small evil, big evil, or extreme evil, are all filled in this dark city. It seems that this city is a city of sin. This caused a great psychological blow to the young Clark. He looked at Arno with pleading eyes, and even tears flowed from his eyes. Godfather, why did this city become like this? This is not true, right? This must not be true. But Arno ruthlessly broke his self-deception. This is true, and it is not why it became like this, but it has always been like this. Looking at Clark, who was in despair, Arno threw out a branch of hope again. But there is no way to change all this. Hearing this, Clark lowered his head and looked at Arno fiercely, his eyes full of hope. What way? You can change all this, Clark, change this dark world, and make it full of vitality and sunshine. Arno's eyes were burning, and his God-making plan began. He wanted to create an omnipotent, strong-hearted, and without any weaknesses in this universe. Follow me. Arno took Clark to the city below. A dark alley. A hooded man holding a free artifact was robbing a couple with their son. Although the man and woman handed over all the money, in order to avoid the 2 people calling the police later, his information was found by the police. He still planned to pull the trigger and end the couple's life. But at this moment, the black shadow covered his whole body like the tentacles of the devil. The moment he looked up, a figure like a large bat fell from the sky and instantly stepped on the robber. Crack! The sound of broken bones echoed, and the weight of the black shadow directly broke several ribs of the robber. Ah! Amid the screams of the robber, the low and hoarse voice of the Black Shadow came out. Go, get out of here. Looking up, there was a pair of cold eyes under the half-covered bat mask. Seeing the terrifying appearance of the visitor, the couple did not even dare to thank him and ran away with their son. Who are you? The criminal under his feet asked with a painful wail. Crack. The Black Shadow directly stepped on the robber's right hand, which was trying to pick up the pistol that fell on the ground, and lifted him up with one hand. The cold eyes under the black mask were like the eyes of the devil judging sin. I am the nightmare of you rats in the dark, the guardian of the dark, Batman. A hoarse and low voice came out of Batman's mouth. A bat dart shining with cold light appeared in his hand. In the robber's terrified eyes, it stabbed at him. The robber closed his eyes tightly, ready to face the pain of death. Crack. As a result, the pain did not come as he expected. He was just nailed to the wall by the bat dart. Repent in prison, rat. After saying that, Batman turned around and slowly fell into the darkness. Ha ha ha, you hypocritical guy, you dare not kill me. But when I get out, I will definitely find you and kill everyone around you. The robber realized that the other party was that group of so-called shitty superheroes, and he couldn't help but relax and even mocked Batman. As we all know, superheroes never kill people. This mockery, if it were another superhero, might have gritted his teeth and left. But he is Batman. The bat figure, which had half of its body in the darkness, turned around without any warning and kicked the right knee of the criminal hanging on the wall. Batman's eyes were full of anger, and his words touched the past that he was most reluctant to face in his heart. If he hadn't established the principle of not killing before he became Batman, he would kill this fool now. But it's just not killing. You deserve greater pain for your sins. Batman held the robber's left crutch with his left hand and his left knee with his right hand. Then, crack X2, Batman crushed his left hand and left leg with force. Originally, he only broke the wrist of the robber holding a gun, but because of his own nonsense, all his limbs were comminuted fractures. This is not over yet. Amid his screams, Batman took out a red-hot bat brand and slammed it into his forehead. Sizzle. Ah! A smell of barbecue came out, and Batman disappeared. The criminal was already dying, with a charred bat mark on his forehead. After Batman left, the robber did not wait for the police to put him in jail, but waited for two other people. One silver gray, one red blue, two tall figures fell from the sky. What do you think of the little bat's actions? Clark frowned. Although the actions are to enforce justice, the behavior is to ignore the law and punish privately. Arno continued to ask. Then what do you think should be done? Clark said righteously. Stop their crimes, send them to prison, and let the law judge them. Arno smiled and asked the last question. Send them to prison, and then let them escape and continue to kill more innocent people. Clark's face changed, but he still insisted. I believe in the punishment of the law, and the prison will not let these criminals escape easily. Listening to his innocent words, Arno pointed at his heart expressionlessly and looked into his eyes. Touch your heart and tell me, do you believe what you say? Looking at Arno's dark and indifferent eyes, Clark wanted to say that he believed it. But when he opened his mouth, he found that he was speechless. Yes, he didn't believe it. Even he didn't believe in his heart that the prison could hold those vicious criminals. Looking at Clark, who was still struggling in his heart, Arno planned to give the young man another heavy blow. Touch him. Arno pointed to the robber who had lost consciousness due to the pain. Clark looked at the robber who had no good place on his body, and felt a little reluctant and at a loss. God knows how cruel the bat's means are. There is no good place on this guy's body. Broken ribs and comminuted fractures of limbs. Finally, Clark chose to put his hand on the relatively intact chest of the robber. Temporarily intact. A memory image appeared in his mind at the moment of contact. Although it was very sudden, he did not feel uncomfortable with his super brain. It was just a trance to adapt to the extra memory images in his mind. What came into view was the daily life of the robber. Gotham went to work on time at 6 o'clock every evening, picking today's lucky person. And this guy seemed to be extremely fond of robbing a family of 3. But the difference this time was that he did not intend to shoot and kill the robbed couple after robbing the family of 3. Instead, he took the money to avoid disaster, and directly made an international gesture and slipped away. As we all know, criminals in Gotham disdain to wear masks. So his appearance was remembered by the man in the family of three. It happened that the man was a sketch artist, so he called the police and drew the robber's appearance perfectly. Not long after, the robber was arrested on the way to work again. But, with his arrest, the matter did not end. On the contrary, it had just begun. The robber was not alone, he had a gang. He went to work on time every day, and half of the green bills he had robbed had to be handed over to the gang. And for such a hard-working employee, the gang would naturally not treat him unfairly, and soon hired a lawyer for him. Or rather, their gang already had a professional lawyer who was responsible for after-sales service. Not long after the lawyer's appeal, the robber was released due to insufficient evidence. This is Gotham. You can't expect him to be reborn and change his ways after he comes out. He only uses his fists to teach others how to be a man, and uses the shotgun in his hand to physically wash others' faces. So he took the gun and found the home of the man who reported him. As for how he found it, the omnipotent gang will give him the answer. The robber was very angry. I kindly let you go, but I just robbed all your money, and you dared to report me to the police. This was his last words before he washed the faces of a family of three with a shotgun. Bang! X3. Then there was blood splattering on the spot, and the family of three was unrecognizable and died tragically at home. Clark gritted his teeth. He was just a bystander, he could do nothing. He could only watch this guy who should have been tried by the law, but was acquitted because of the law and killed an innocent family of three. If this could still allow Clark to control his emotions. Then the robber hid a bomb in the home of the police who arrested him. When the police returned home after a hard day and had a warm dinner with his family, they were blown to death. His anger reached its peak, and his hands began to exert force unconsciously. At the end of the picture, the robber looked at the house burning in the distance and laughed wildly. But because he did not leave direct evidence and was covered by the gang, he escaped legal sanctions again. Until he met the Bat. And the family of three, the policeman and his family, are just the tip of the iceberg in the robber's 5-star life. Crack. Ah! A crisp sound and a scream brought Clark back to his senses. He opened his bloodshot eyes and left the robber's memory. Only then did he realize that his hand had crushed the robber's chest unconsciously. If he moved forward a little, he would press directly into his body. And even if it was just his sternum that was crushed now, this guy had his ribs broken by the Bat and his limbs were crushed. Now that his sternum was broken by himself, even if he was not dead, he would be living a life worse than death, just waiting for death. But Clark didn't have a trace of sympathy in his heart at this moment, but was secretly happy. He deserved it. But immediately, he came back to his senses. What am I thinking? Clark looked at the blood on his hands with horror. He didn't understand why he had such a terrible idea. Then what's the difference between him and those criminals? And what's the difference between him and the Bat that tortured privately? The difference is that they use power to kill innocent people. And we use power to protect innocent people. And the best protection for innocent people is to eliminate the root of evil. Eliminate the root of evil, do you mean to kill them all? Clark looked at his godfather with lifeless eyes. The super brain that can solve everything was blank at this moment. This time the super brain didn't give him an answer. So he could only beg his godfather to give him an answer. Arno shook his head, pressed his shoulders, and said slowly and heavily. No, Clark, there is no end to evil. As long as there are people, there will always be evil. What we need to do is not mindless killing. But let them know that evil can never escape punishment. There is a pair of eyes in the sky watching them all the time. Clark's pure and kind heart seemed to be shaken. Sanctions. Break their limbs like that Bat and brand them. No, that Bat is still too conservative. I said I want to let them know that there is a pair of eyes in the sky watching them all the time. You have to let them know that evil should be buried in the ground. Arno pressed Clark's head and pointed it at the robber's face. And those eyes are sacred, dazzling, and deadly. There was still some struggle in Clark's eyes, and the last kindness in his heart was resisting him from carrying out such a cruel practice. Until the hand behind his head lit up with a yellow light. The power of the Mind Stone spreads. But it is not to control Clark, but to give him the last straw that breaks the camel's back. That is, the mind connection of the whole city of Gotham. In an instant, countless different emotions flooded into Clark's brain, and negative emotions accounted for more than 90%. The burning, killing and looting of criminals, the fear and resentment of victims, and the panic of ordinary people. Ah! Clark held his head with both hands and wailed in despair and pain. His super brain could handle the huge amount of emotional information that suddenly poured in. But the fear and malice in the countless negative emotions kept stabbing his brain like a sharp blade. As he wailed, a huge sound wave spread from Clark's mouth throughout Gotham City. And the people of Gotham City didn't know what they were about to face. They just looked at the sky in confusion, trying to find where the painful wailing came from. I don't understand what kind of tragic situation the wailing people have encountered, so they will wailing so desperately. Only a certain bat who is still executing his own way of justice, his heart beat wildly at this moment. He looked at the end of the dark sky, and the blood-red sunset that had ignited at some point, and had an ominous premonition in his heart. When Clark opened his eyes again, there was no mercy in his eyes, only red light flickered. Sins, too many sins. The Godfather was right. Those sins should be buried in the soil, instead of growing and taking root in the kindness of human beings. Since those sins are unwilling to hide in the soil, there needs to be a pair of eyes in the sky to help them bury themselves. And those eyes are me. At this moment, fate began to change, and the world will usher in a brand new Superman. Clark's already strong body seemed to be even taller and more ferocious at this moment. Smash it, look into my eyes. He held up the head of the robber who was deafened by his huge sound waves with both hands. The huge force coming from both sides of the head forced the robber, who was almost dead, to open his eyes. However, when he just opened his eyes, he was greeted by a pair of judgment eyes full of hell-red rocks. Z. The red laser instantly shot through the robber's head, burning 2 charred holes on the ground. Arno touched the hair on Clark's head with a bright smile, and the yellow light on his palms shone, soothing Clark's brain filled with negative emotions. Good boy, you did a good job. But you can be gentler next time, let him reflect deeply under your hot eyes, and then send him to God to repent. I understand, Godfather. At this moment, Clark looked at the blood on his hands, no longer panicked before, only firm faith in his eyes. This world needs to be purified. Start from Gotham. Clark slowly rose into the air and looked at Gotham City under his feet. This night is destined to be a river of blood. The first ray of sunlight in the morning lit up, accurately shining on a man covered in blood. Arno appeared beside Clark and spoke slowly. Control your heart and don't let it be covered by killing. This gentle sentence was like a huge hammer hitting Clark's head, making the red light in his eyes fade and regain his sanity. Godfather, I killed people, killed a lot of people. Arno looked at the bloody city below with satisfaction. Although Clark still restrained himself, he killed people who were extremely evil and could be shot 800 times. But he was surprised and delighted to be able to do this for the first time. No, you are not killing people, you are saving people, silly boy. Every criminal you eliminate is the salvation of countless families. Clark didn't hesitate this time and got the affirmation of his godfather. He strengthened his belief and nodded directly. Yes, I am saving people, I am saving countless people. Good boy, come on, to reward your excellent performance today, I will take you to a good place. Arno opened a blue portal. But Clark did not follow up immediately, but hesitated. But there are still many evils in the world that have not been eliminated. I don't think I have time to do other things. Arno looked at Clark in surprise. How come this kid is more murderous than himself? The elimination of evil cannot be done overnight. Even if you can kill all the evildoers in one day, there will be more evildoers tomorrow. You need to be not a killing tool, but a deterrent. Of course, you also need to show iron-blooded means when necessary. Arno patted Clark's bloody face with a serious look, shoulder. However, it doesn't have to be so bloody, just the right amount will do. Remember to use the bio-force field to isolate the blood next time. I was complained about this last time. Clark just nodded about the bio-force field isolation, not caring much. But he was a little angry about the existence of complaining about his godfather, and his eyes lit up with fiery red-hot eyes. Who dares to complain about you, the godfather? I'll teach him a lesson. Forget it, you can't teach them a lesson. Come on, let's go see your reward, you'll like it. Arno sighed and waved his hand, and walked directly into the space channel. The next moment, the two appeared in the cold and windy Arctic. Is this the North Pole? The place where you taught me to fly? Yes, but you didn't observe carefully enough. You were so excited about flying that you didn't observe this place carefully. Sorry, Godfather, I was too excited last time. Well, I understand, but next time, remember to learn to observe whether there are things that you can't see through, such as lead, before doing anything, just in case. I understand. If there are things that you can't see through, we will take a long-term plan, right? No, if you can't see through, just shoot it with thermal vision from a distance. Clark suddenly realized. So that's how it is. I've learned it, Godfather. Arno nodded, very satisfied with Clark's ideological awareness. Now observe the surroundings. Hearing this, Clark saw through the layers of ice around him and finally stopped on an iceberg. Is that a spaceship? Yes, to be precise, it's a Kryptonian spaceship, from your hometown, Krypton. Krypton, is that the name of our real hometown? Clark was a little excited. That's right. Where is it then? Why was I sent to Earth? How did you get here? Were you sent here as a child like me? I'm different from you. As for other questions, someone will answer them for you. Arno was too lazy to tell him his half-baked knowledge of Krypton, so he opened the portal again and took Clark directly into the spacecraft. The two walked through a long corridor and came to the control room. A suspended tentacle monster defense machine discovered the strange intruder and immediately turned on the attack mode. Then, he was slapped to pieces by Arno. Insert the key you are wearing into the console. Clark obediently took off the black Krypton key that Jonathan had given him when he was a child and inserted it into the console. Suddenly, a man in Kryptonian clothes appeared out of thin air. Who are you? As Clark asked. The phantom of his biological father, Jor-El, gave Clark a boring Kryptonian science knowledge. In summary, it is nothing more than colonization, migration, consumption, coup, destruction, hope. Clark listened to the stories of his home planet with great interest. Arno, however, was not very interested. He cared about something else. Arno's eyes lit up with a white gold light, and he looked at the distant starry sky outside the Earth with a sense of something. In the distant universe, in a Kryptonian spaceship, a man with a majestic face also looked towards the direction of the Earth with a sense of something. Drew Zod. Almost at the same time, the excited voice of the scientists on the spaceship came. General Zod, we have received the signal of the newly opened Kryptonian spaceship. Maybe the life code sent away by Jor-El is there. Zod's calm eyes could not help but become enthusiastic, and he immediately ordered. Let's go. Go to the coordinate point where the signal was sent immediately. We will take back the life code and rebuild the glory of Krypton. Arno watched this scene with a smile on his face. His people are coming. That's right. General Zod and his subordinates have long been regarded as in Arno's pocket. And all the actions of General Zod and his subordinates were also seen by him. As early as entering this universe, he did not intend to go back empty-handed. He wants things. He also wants people, especially Kryptonians. These are SSR-level subordinates. He wants them even more. He has very high requirements for his subordinates and will not take in small minions casually. Only special talents such as Natasha's fighting skills and assassination interrogation skills, the power of hatred, and Deadpool's immortality, he will take them in if he is slightly satisfied. His consistent view is that subordinates do not have to be many, but they must be capable. And Kryptonians, whether in combat or IQ, have some nearly perfect abilities. Such existences are born to be taken in by him. Besides, he is a Kryptonian, and General Zod is also a Kryptonian. General Zod wants Krypton to regain its glory, and he also wants to create his own Krypton. Arno has even thought of the place to restore the glory of Krypton. He remembered that he seemed to have a kingdom of God to be claimed. Since he can restore the glory of Krypton, it is not wrong to say that he is the king of the entire Krypton, and General Zod and his men are his subordinates, right? No problem. However, all these need to wait until General Zod comes, and judging from their speed, it should not take long for them to reach the Earth. The new supervision that has evolved from the unity of spirit and body not only allows him to see things that he could not see before. It can also ignore the spatial distance and directly observe the target he wants to see. Of course, the premise is that he knows the general information of the other party and that the strength is not much higher than his. It is a bit similar to the portal of Kamar Taj. And after seeing the other party, he can use the other party as a spatial point to directly locate and teleport to the person or object. Arno affectionately called this move, "Follow the network cable to get you." Because of this move, he knows the other party's information and can really follow the space point to get the other party. However, although he found General Zod, he did not intend to teleport directly to subdue them. Because he did not intend to keep General Zod and other Kryptonians in this universe. Instead, he planned to take them back to the Marvel universe. But he did not intend to give up the DC universe. There are still many good things here, and he will probably come again in the future. When he is away, he needs someone to help him manage the Earth in the DC universe. And this person is naturally Clark. Since he knew that this was the DC universe, he has planned all this. Let Clark become the Superman he needs, not the Saint Mother. And manage this planet, become the most feared nightmare of criminals, and the most worshipped god by people. And the easiest way to achieve all this is to let people all over the world see the power of Superman. So, he plans to let General Zod play the last remaining heat in this universe. Create a god. Through the battle between Kryptonians. Let the world know the power of Kryptonians, and know that their world has a god on Earth from now on. Over there, Clark, or Kal-El, has almost finished talking with his father Jor-El. Jor-El suddenly looked at Arno and frowned. "Who are you? Why is there no information about you in the Krypton database? Or are you the child of a Kryptonian wandering outside before the destruction of Krypton?" Faced with Joe's doubts, Arno did not explain his origins, but spoke directly. "It doesn't matter who I am, you just need to know that I am the next leader of Krypton." Jor-El, "But Krypton has perished. It is your Krypton that has perished, and my Krypton has just begun." Jor-El was silent after hearing this, and looked at his son who stood beside Arno after Arno spoke, and he finally sighed. Krypton's last hope was already standing beside him, and it was too late for him to say anything. "I hope you can make the reborn Krypton more glorious, and not follow our old path." Jor-El finally looked at Clark deeply, and the phantom disappeared. Clark was a little reluctant to see Joe disappear. After all, he was his biological father, even if it was just an illusion. "Clark, do you believe me?" Arno's sudden words made Clark's reluctance dissipate, and he immediately said firmly, "Of course, you are my godfather, you changed my life and taught me the true meaning." Arno looked at Clark. Clark's eyes were full of trust, and his tone softened a little. "Very good, then, do you want Krypton to be reborn?" "Of course, then I need to borrow something from you, and it may be painful in the process." Clark was stunned, then smiled and shook his head to express his disbelief. "Godfather, as long as I have it, you can take whatever you want." "But, pain, that's impossible, absolutely impossible." Clark's face was full of confidence. "I am a body of steel, and I will feel pain." What a joke. 1 minute later, Clark's forehead veins bulged, and the extreme pain made him clench his fists tightly, and the biological force field around his body unconsciously spread. The ground within a radius of 1 kilometer continued to sink under the pressure of his biological force field. Clark felt as if his body had returned to his infancy, and was forcibly pulled back to the current painful feeling, and he could no longer hold back his screams. He wanted to withdraw what he said a minute ago at this moment. The green energy threads on the 5 fingers of Arno's right hand penetrated into Clark's body. The power of time continuously extracted and restored the code of life. This was Arno's precise control of the power of time, which brought the code of life, which had been integrated into every cell of Clark, back to its complete state. 10 minutes later, Clark, pale and covered in cold sweat, fell to the ground. Above his head, a skull with flowing golden light was floating. Code of life. Arno held the code of life with some expectation in his eyes, and the power of his mind penetrated into it. After a long time, he shook his head in disappointment. Sure enough, it was as he expected. The code of life is not that magical. It is not a magical artifact that will become more powerful if you get it. It is actually just a Kryptonian gene map, which allows people to artificially create Kryptonians. It's just that the map contains many categories of Kryptonian genes, and you can artificially choose what type of Kryptonian you need to produce. If you want him to be a warrior, then set the warrior's gene map. If he is a doctor, then set the doctor. If he is a scientist, then set the scientist, and so on. The fate of these Kryptonians has been determined since birth. This is both the key to the continuation of the Kryptonian race and the shackles that will eventually lead to the destruction of the Kryptonians. The fate of a person is destined to be destroyed. Arno called these genes defective products. Although the Kryptonians produced with these genes can also absorb sunlight and become stronger like Clark. But the code in the gene is destined to have an upper limit, and they cannot grow unlimitedly like Clark or himself. However, there are things in the code of life that Arno likes. There are two things that he is quite interested in. The first is the code engraved in every gene: loyalty. Always loyal to Krypton. The first rule of all Kryptonians born is loyalty to Krypton. This is engraved in their genes and cannot be changed. However, that was something that could not be changed for the former Kryptonians, because they were destined from birth to not betray Krypton, and naturally no one would think of changing this rule. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.